The dust settled around Daniel Harper's weathered boots as he watched the sleek black SUVs pull up to his failing farm. His heart raced as the woman he'd helped on the roadside just days ago stepped out, now dressed in an expensive suit instead of muddy overalls. She smiled, extending a contract that would save everything he'd fought to preserve for generations. "Your ingenuity saved my project," she said, "and now I'm going to save your legacy." Daniel looked down at his calloused hands, the same hands that had repaired a stranger's wheelbarrow with scraps from his barn, never imagining they were mending his own future. "Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments." The summer heat pressed down on Oak Ridge Valley like a heavy blanket, the kind that suffocates rather than comforts. Daniel Harper wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, careful not to transfer the dark soil that perpetually stained his fingers onto his face. It was a useless gesture. His sun-browned skin was already streaked with dirt, sweat, and the invisible marks of worry that had become his constant companion. He squinted up at the cloudless sky, the relentless blue offering no promise of rain for his parched fields. The corn stalks stood at attention, but they were shorter than they should have been this late in July. The irrigation system he'd patched together from second-hand parts and desperation was barely keeping his crops alive, let alone thriving. "Not today," Daniel muttered to himself as he heard the telltale sputter from the water pump. "Just give me one more week." At 42, Daniel carried the weight of 4 generations of Harpers who had worked this land. His great-grandfather had purchased these original 100 acres with money saved from working 3 jobs. His grandfather had expanded it during the prosperous post-war years. His father had modernized in the 70s and 80s. And Daniel? Daniel was just trying not to be the one who lost it all. The bank statements hidden in his desk drawer told the story his pride wouldn't allow him to share with anyone else. 3 more missed payments, and the farm would go to auction. The drought had stretched from 1 season into 2, then 3. The equipment breakdown seemed coordinated, as if the tractors and pumps had formed a union to strike all at once. And crop prices had fallen just when he needed them to rise. Daniel made his way back to the barn, his shoulders tight with tension. He needed to fix the water pump before nightfall, or risk losing another section of crops. Inside the cavernous old structure, shafts of sunlight cut through gaps in the weathered wood, illuminating dancing dust motes and the organized chaos of Daniel's workshop. Unlike the rest of the farm, which had succumbed to entropy and neglect due to financial constraints, Daniel's tool area was meticulously maintained. Wrenches hung in size order on a pegboard he'd made in high school shop class. Screwdrivers, pliers, and specialty implements each had their designated spots. Parts and supplies were sorted in labeled plastic containers, stacked on industrial shelving he'd salvaged from a hardware store going out of business 3 towns over. This was Daniel's domain, the one place where he still felt in control. He might not be able to make the rain fall or the bank extend his loan, but he could fix almost anything mechanical with enough time and ingenuity. He was gathering tools for the pump repair when he heard tires on the gravel driveway. Visitors were rare these days. Most of his friends had drifted away as the farm consumed more and more of his time and energy. The community still respected the Harper name, but they kept their distance from what many viewed as a failing enterprise. Stepping out of the barn's shadow, Daniel saw a battered pickup truck pulling a small trailer. Not the loan officer then. The bank representatives always arrived in sedans with air conditioning that kept their shirts crisp and their expressions cool. The truck came to a stop, and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, dressed in denim overalls with a faded plaid shirt underneath. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, wisps escaping around her face. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or authority, yet she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Excuse me," she called, shielding her eyes from the sun with one hand. "Is this the Harper farm?" Daniel approached, wiping his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "It is. I'm Daniel Harper." "Elizabeth Morgan," she replied, extending a hand that was surprisingly calloused for its slenderness. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I've got a bit of the situation." Her situation was visible on the small trailer behind her truck, A large, industrial-grade wheelbarrow with a completely flat tire and a bent axle. Not the kind used in home gardens, but the heavy-duty type used on construction sites, or, as she explained, experimental farming projects. "I'm doing some work a few miles down the road," Elizabeth said, gesturing vaguely toward the east, "and this is the only decent equipment I've got at the moment. The tire blew out completely, and then the axle bent when I tried to move it." Daniel circled the wheelbarrow, assessing the damage. The rubber was torn beyond repair, and the axle would need to be straightened or replaced. It wasn't a complex fix, but it would require specific parts that weren't common in rural hardware stores. "Most people would just buy a new one," he commented, not looking up as he examined the bent metal. "Most people aren't on a tight budget with work that can't wait," Elizabeth replied, a hint of weariness in her voice that resonated with Daniel's own exhaustion. He straightened up and met her gaze. There was something in her eyes, determination mixed with fatigue, that he recognized from his own reflection. A fellow traveler on the difficult road of making things work with too few resources. "I can fix it," he said simply. "Might take a couple of hours. I've got some scrap rubber that should work for the tire, and I can straighten that axle with my press." Relief washed over Elizabeth's face. "That would be incredible. The closest farm supply store is 3 towns over, and they said they don't have parts for this model anyway." Daniel nodded, already mentally cataloging the steps needed for the repair. "You're welcome to wait in the house. There's cold tea in the refrigerator. Just go through that side door into the kitchen." Elizabeth hesitated. "Actually, I'd rather watch, if you don't mind. I should learn how to make these repairs myself." Something about her request tickled the back of Daniel's mind. Most people were eager to escape the heat of the barn, happy to leave repairs to someone else. Her interest seemed genuine, though, and he found himself nodding. "Suit yourself. It'll be hot in there, and I don't talk much when I'm working." Elizabeth smiled, the expression transforming her serious face into something luminous. "That's fine. I ask a lot of questions, though. Fair warning." For the next 2 hours, Daniel worked methodically on the wheelbarrow, while Elizabeth observed from a perch on an overturned feed bucket. True to her word, she asked questions, intelligent ones, that indicated she understood more about mechanics than her initial helplessness had suggested. "Where did you learn to do all this?" she asked, as Daniel used a blowtorch to heat the axle before carefully bending it back into alignment with a specialized tool he'd fabricated himself years ago. "My father," Daniel replied, concentrating on the metal as it glowed red-hot. "And his father before him. On a farm, you either learn to fix things yourself or you go broke paying others to do it for you. And yet most farmers I meet these days call in specialists for everything," Elizabeth mused. Daniel allowed himself a small frown. Most farmers these days aren't operating on margins as thin as razor wire. Besides, there's something to be said for knowing your own equipment inside and out. He moved to the workbench, where he'd laid out materials for the tire repair. The original rubber was beyond salvation, but he had salvaged a section from an old tractor tire that could be cut and fitted to the wheelbarrow's rim. "This is the impressive part," he said, surprising himself with the comment. He rarely spoke during repairs, let alone narrated them for an audience. "This rubber is actually better than what came on your wheelbarrow. It's thicker and has a more aggressive tread pattern. It'll handle rough terrain better." Elizabeth leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "You can just swap parts like that? Use something from a completely different machine?" Daniel shrugged as he carefully measured and marked the rubber for cutting. "Principles are the same, even if the specifics vary. This rubber needs to create an airtight seal against this rim, and it needs to be strong enough to support whatever load you're carrying. Beyond that, it's just a matter of making it fit." As he worked, cutting the rubber with precision despite the crude tools, then attaching it to the rim with a combination of adhesive and mechanical fasteners, Daniel found himself explaining more about farm repairs than he had spoken aloud in months. Elizabeth was an attentive audience, asking questions that pushed him to articulate knowledge he usually kept inside his head. By the time the wheelbarrow was repaired, the summer afternoon was sliding toward evening. The fixed wheelbarrow sat between them, its new tire looking somewhat mismatched, but undeniably sturdy. That should hold up better than the original, Daniel said, running a hand along the repaired axle. I reinforced it at the stress points. Elizabeth circled the wheelbarrow, inspecting his work with an appraising eye that seemed more professional than her casual appearance suggested. This is remarkable, she said finally. How much do I owe you? Daniel hesitated. The repair had taken several hours of his time and used materials he'd been saving. But there was something about Elizabeth that made him reluctant to charge her full price. Perhaps it was the way she had shown genuine interest in his work, or maybe it was just the company after too many solitary days. $50 should cover it, he said, naming a figure that barely covered the materials. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not nearly enough for this quality of work and your time. Before Daniel could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted. They both looked toward the open barn door, where the previously clear sky had given way to dark clouds rolling in from the west. Looks like you might finally get some rain, Elizabeth observed. Let's hope, Daniel replied, though experience had taught him not to count on promising clouds. Too often they passed over his land without releasing their precious cargo. As if the Harper farm existed under some meteorological curse, Elizabeth pulled a $100 bill from her pocket and handed it to Daniel. I insist on paying you properly for your time and expertise. Daniel wanted to refuse, but pride battled with practicality and practicality won. The irrigation pump still needed parts, and this unexpected income would help. Thank you, he said simply as he accepted the money. Together they loaded the repaired wheelbarrow onto Elizabeth's trailer, as she secured it with straps. The first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering on the metal roof of the barn and raising tiny dust explosions on the dry ground. Perfect timing, Elizabeth remarked as she finished tightening the last strap. She turned to Daniel, raindrops beginning to darken spots on her overalls. Thank you again. You've saved me a lot of trouble. Daniel nodded, already turning his attention to the approaching storm and what it might mean for his fields. Glad to help. Good luck with your project. Elizabeth climbed into her truck but paused before closing the door. You know, she called over the increasing patter of rain, sometimes the most innovative solutions come from people who have to make do with limited buys and resources. Don't sell yourself short, Mr. Harper. Before Daniel could respond to this cryptic comment, she closed the door and started the engine. He watched as the truck and trailer made their way down the driveway, gravel crunching beneath the tires, until they turned onto the main road and disappeared from view. The rain was falling steadily now, a gentle soaking downpour rather than a violent storm. Daniel tilted his face up, letting the cool drops wash away some of the day's dust and sweat. His land was drinking thirstily, and he allowed himself a moment of gratitude for this small blessing. As he turned back toward the barn, his thoughts drifted to the water pump that still needed repair. Then, with a slight shake of his head, they returned to the strange encounter with Elizabeth Morgan and her broken wheelbarrow. There had been something unusual about her, a discrepancy between her work-worn hands and her articulate speech, between her claimed budget constraints and her easy surrender of a $100 bill. But such puzzles were luxuries Daniel couldn't afford. The rain was a gift, but it wouldn't solve his financial problems or fix his equipment. Those challenges remained, constant companions in his struggle to preserve his family's legacy. Inside the barn, he gathered the tools for the pump repair. The brief distraction of helping a stranger had been pleasant, but reality demanded his attention. And reality, for Daniel Harper, was a relentless sequence of problems to solve with dwindling resources and mounting pressure. Still, as he loaded tools into his truck to drive out to the malfunctioning pump, he found himself hoping that Elizabeth's gay project, whatever it was, would benefit from his repair. There was satisfaction in knowing his skills had been useful, even if just to a passing stranger with a broken wheelbarrow. The rain continued to fall, offering temporary relief to his parched fields and to the parched spirit of a farmer fighting to survive one more season. 3 days after the unexpected rainstorm, Daniel was kneeling in mud beside his eastern field's irrigation channel. The rain had been substantial enough to provide a brief reprieve, but not nearly sufficient to reverse the effects of the prolonged drought. Now he was back to nursing his patchwork irrigation system trying to coax water to the furthest sections of his corn. His hands were deep in the muck, clearing a blockage in one of the pipes, when he heard the now familiar sound of tires on his gravel driveway. Sitting back on his heels, he squinted toward the approaching vehicle, expecting to see Elizabeth's battered pickup truck. Instead, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows made its way up the drive, moving with deliberate slowness, as if the driver was uncertain of their destination. Daniel's stomach tightened. Unexpected visitors and expensive vehicles rarely brought good news to struggling farmers. He stood, wiping his hands on his already soiled jeans, and walked toward the main yard to meet the visitor. The SUV came to a stop near his house, and the driver's door opened to reveal a man in what appeared to be a chauffeur's uniform. The man nodded respectfully to Daniel before moving to open the rear passenger door. Daniel stopped in his tracks as Elizabeth Morgan stepped out of the SUV. Gone were the practical overalls and worn plaid shirt. In their place was a tailored pantsuit in a shade of blue that matched the summer sky. Her hair, previously confined to a simple ponytail, was now styled in a sleek, professional manner that framed her face elegantly. She smiled at his obvious surprise. "Hello again, Mr. Harper." Daniel found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. "Ms. Morgan, your wheelbarrow holding up all right?" End quote. Her smile widened, revealing perfect teeth that seemed too even to be natural. "Perfectly. In fact, that's part of why I'm here." Another door on the SUV opened, and a second individual emerged, a middle-aged man carrying a leather portfolio case, dressed in an expensive suit that made Elizabeth's look casual by comparison. "This is Mr. Jeffries, my attorney," Elizabeth said, gesturing to the man, who offered Daniel a polite nod. Attorney. The word landed like a stone in Daniel's gut. Had he somehow violated a patent with his repair? Was she here to claim he damaged her property? His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "Let's cut to the chase," Elizabeth continued, apparently reading his concern. "I wasn't entirely forthcoming about who I am when we met." "I gathered that," Daniel replied dryly, glancing pointedly at the luxury vehicle. Elizabeth had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I prefer to assess situations without the complications that can arise when people know my full identity." She extended her hand formally. "Elizabeth Morgan Westfield, founder and CEO of Agri-Novat Industries." Daniel's eyes widened despite his attempt to maintain composure. Agri-Novat was one of the largest agricultural technology companies in the country, known for developing cutting-edge solutions for modern farming challenges. Their equipment was the stuff of dreams for farmers like him, efficient, durable, and priced well beyond his reach. He shook her hand, automatically, acutely aware of the dirt beneath his fingernails and the stark contrast between his mud-spattered appearance and her immaculate presentation. "What brings the CEO of Agri-Novat to my humble farm?" he asked, unable to keep an edge of defensiveness from his tone. "Your ingenuity," Elizabeth replied simply, "and your repair of my wheelbarrow." Daniel frowned. "It was a basic fix. Nothing special." "On the contrary," Elizabeth countered, "you took materials designed for one purpose and repurposed them effectively for another. You strengthened weak points without being asked. You improved on the original design rather than simply restoring it to factory specifications." She paused, studying his face. "Do you realize how rare that kind of adaptive thinking is becoming in modern agriculture?" Before Daniel could respond, Elizabeth gestured toward his fields. "May we walk? I'd like to see more of your operation." Confusion and suspicion battled within him, but curiosity won out. "Sure," he agreed, leading the way toward the eastern field where he'd been working. Mr. Jeffries remained by the SUV, apparently content to let his employer conduct her business alone. As they walked along the edge of the field, Elizabeth observed everything with keen eyes: the irrigation channels, the condition of the crops, the repaired equipment visible in the distance. "You've been maintaining this farm against significant odds," she remarked. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded cautiously. "It's been in my family for 4 generations. And the bank is about to foreclose," Elizabeth stated matter-of-factly. Daniel stopped walking. "How would you know that?" Elizabeth turned to face him, her expression serious. Because I make it my business to understand the realities facing family farms in this region. The drought, falling crop prices, rising equipment costs, it's a perfect storm that's forcing out even the most dedicated farmers. She gestured to the fields around them. Your land should have been sold to a corporate farming entity 2 years ago, based on the economic pressures. Yet here you are, still fighting. There was admiration in her voice, but Daniel felt exposed and vulnerable. His financial struggles were a private shame, not something he discussed openly, especially not with the CEO of a major agricultural bay corporation. I'm not looking for sympathy, he said stiffly. Good, because I'm not offering any, Elizabeth replied, her tone suddenly businesslike. I'm offering an opportunity. She began walking again, and Daniel fell into step beside her, his curiosity overcoming his discomfort. The wheelbarrow you repaired, Elizabeth continued, was part of a test. I've been touring farms in this region incognito, assessing the state of agricultural innovation at the ground level. Most of the farmers I approached with my broken wheelbarrow either couldn't fix it or suggested I replace it entirely. Daniel processed this information slowly. You were deliberately presenting people with a problem to see how they'd solve it. Elizabeth nodded. Exactly. AgriNova develops advanced technology, but we found that the most practical innovations often come from farmers who have to solve real-world problems with limited resources. She paused, turning to face him again. Your solution was elegant, cost-effective, and actually improved on the original design. Daniel remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. I want to offer you a position with AgriNova, Elizabeth stated directly, as a field innovation consultant. Your job would be to continue what you're already doing, finding practical solutions to agricultural challenges, but with the backing of our resources and the opportunity to see your innovations implemented on a larger scale. The offer was so unexpected that Daniel almost laughed. You want to hire me because I fixed a wheelbarrow? I want to hire you because you demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to cultivate, Elizabeth corrected. The wheelbarrow was just a visible example of what I suspect is a pattern of innovative problem-solving throughout your operation. She gestured around them. I'd bet that everywhere on this farm, there are examples of you making do, adapting, improving with limited means. She wasn't wrong. From the modified irrigation system that used gravity to reduce pump load to the custom attachments he'd built for his aging tractor, Daniel's farm was a testament to necessity-driven innovation. The position comes with a significant salary, Elizabeth continued, as well as profit sharing on any innovations that go into production. But more importantly for your immediate concerns, it includes a substantial signing bonus. Daniel's heart rate quickened. How substantial? Enough to settle your debt with the bank and provide operating capital for this farm for the next 2 growing seasons. Elizabeth replied without hesitation. It was too good to be true. Daniel had learned through bitter experience that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. What's the catch? What's the catch? Oh, too. Elizabeth's expression remained open and steady. We'd want first right of refusal on any agricultural innovations you develop, whether during your employment with us or for a period of 5 years afterward. And we'd expect you to be available for consultation on implementation of those innovations. So you'd own my ideas, Daniel translated. We'd compensate you fairly for them, Elizabeth corrected. And we'd have the capacity to bring them to farmers worldwide, rather than them remaining isolated solutions on a single farm in Oak Ridge Valley. Daniel fell silent, considering the implications. The offer would save his farm, there was no question about that. But it would also fundamentally change his relationship with his work. His innovations would no longer be solely his own, developed for his specific needs. They would become products, commoditized and distributed to anonymous users he would never meet. I need time to think about this, he said finally. Elizabeth nodded, reaching into her suit jacket to withdraw a business card. I expected as much. Here's my direct contact information. I'd appreciate your decision within the week. As they walked back toward the SUV, Daniel found his thoughts in turmoil. The possibility of financial salvation was intoxicating after years of constant stress. Yet there was something unsettling about the way Elizabeth had orchestrated their meeting, testing him without his knowledge. "One more thing," Elizabeth said as they approached the vehicle where Mr. Jeffries waited patiently. "Regardless of your decision about the position, I'd like to commission you to develop an improved version of that wheelbarrow design. We believe there's significant potential for a more durable, adaptable model for small-scale farming operations." She named a figure for the commission that made Daniel blink in surprise. "That's generous," he managed to say. "It's market rate for specialized design consultancy," Elizabeth replied with a slight shrug. "We pay for quality." Mr. Jeffries stepped forward, opening a slim leather portfolio. "I've taken the liberty of drawing up a simple agreement for the Wheelbarrow Commission," he explained, his voice as smooth and expensive-sounding as his suit. "It's separate from the employment offer, with no obligations beyond this specific project." Daniel accepted the document, scanning the straightforward terms. The commission was indeed separate from the job offer, with no hidden clauses or commitments beyond the development of an improved wheelbarrow design. It represented immediate income that could address some of his most pressing financial concerns while he considered the larger proposition. "I can do this," he agreed. Signing the document and returning it to the attorney, Mr. Jeffries produced a check already made out in the agreed-upon amount and handed it to Daniel. The paper felt unnaturally light in his hand, given the number of zeros it contained. "I look forward to seeing what you create," Elizabeth said with evident sincerity, "and to hearing your decision about joining our team." With that, she and her attorney returned to the SUV, which soon disappeared down the gravel driveway, leaving behind only a settling cloud of dust and a stunned farmer holding a check that could change the trajectory of his immediate future. Daniel stood motionless long after the vehicle had disappeared from view, the check still in his hand, his mind racing with possibilities and questions. The sun beat down on his shoulders, reminding him of the unfinished irrigation work and the countless other tasks awaiting his attention. Yet for the first time in years, those tasks didn't feel like links in an endless chain of survival. There was a glimmer of something else on the horizon if he chose to reach for it. With careful movements, as if handling a rare and fragile object, Daniel folded the check and placed it in his wallet. Then, he turned back to his fields, where reality awaited in the form of blocked irrigation pipes and thirsty crops. The future would have to wait its turn. For now, there was still work to be done. The next morning dawned cool and clear, a temporary respite from the heat that had been baking the region for weeks. Daniel rose before sunrise, as he always did, but with a different energy than usual. The check from Elizabeth Morgan Westfield had been deposited the previous afternoon, and the teller's widened eyes had confirmed what Daniel already knew. This was life-changing money, even if it was just for a single grain commission. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, he headed to the barn. The commission trajectory designing the wheelbarrow would need to take priority today, at least for a few hours. He'd been turning ideas over in his mind since Elizabeth left, and he was eager to get them into tangible form. The barn, which had seemed like a monument to his struggles just days before, now felt different. The same tools hung on the walls. The same salvaged materials filled the shelves, but the context had shifted. What had been desperate making do now represented potential innovation. The parts he'd been hoarding weren't just stopgap measures to keep his farm functioning, they were raw materials for creation. Daniel cleared a space on his main workbench and pulled out a sketch pad. Despite the digital age, he preferred to begin designs with pencil and paper, the tactile connection between hand and idea more immediate than any computer interface. He sketched rapidly, his pencil flying across the page as he explored variations on the wheelbarrow design. The standard model had several weaknesses. The tire was vulnerable to punctures, the axle could bend under heavy loads, and the balance was poor when fully loaded, putting strain on the user's arms and back. His modified version would address all these issues. The tire would use a dual-layer design similar to the repurposed tractor tire he'd fitted to Elizabeth's wheelbarrow, but with modifications to reduce weight. The axle would be reinforced at key stress points, using a technique he developed for his tractor attachments. And for balance, he envisioned a redistributed load design that would center the weight more effectively over the wheel. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel became so absorbed in his work that he nearly missed the sound of an approaching vehicle. He glanced at his watch, surprised to find that several hours had passed. Setting aside his sketches, he walked to the barn entrance, expecting to see the mail carrier or perhaps a delivery of parts he'd ordered for the irrigation system. Instead, a modest sedan was parking beside his truck. The door opened to reveal Meredith Caldwell, his loan officer from First Regional Bank. Her appearance sent a jolt of anxiety through him before he remembered the deposit from yesterday. For the first time in years, he could face his banker without dread. "Mr. Harper," Meredith called as she approached, a leather portfolio similar to the one carried by Elizabeth's attorney tucked under her arm. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "Of course," Daniel replied, gesturing toward the house. "Would you like some coffee?" Meredith raised an eyebrow slightly at his unusual hospitality. Their previous meetings had been tense affairs, with Daniel defensive and minimally communicative. "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." In the kitchen, Daniel busied himself with the coffee maker, while Meredith settled at the worn oak table that had been in the Harper family for generations. The room, like much of the house, showed signs of deferred maintenance. A crack in one window pane, sealed with tape, cabinet doors that didn't quite align, linoleum flooring worn through to the subflooring in high-traffic areas. "I was surprised to see the deposit yesterday," Meredith began, as Daniel placed a mug of coffee before her. "It's a significant amount." Daniel nodded, taking the seat across from her. "Design commission," he explained briefly. "For Agri Novat Industries." Meredith's eyebrows rose higher. "Agri Novat? That's unexpected." She sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of the mug. "May I ask how that came about?" Daniel provided a simplified version of his encounter with Elizabeth, omitting the job offer and focusing on the wheelbarrow repair that had led to the commission. As he spoke, he realized how improbable the story sounded. A CEO of a major corporation, disguised as a struggling farmer, visiting his property by chance. "That's quite fortunate," Meredith commented when he finished. She set down her coffee and opened her portfolio. "This deposit changes your situation considerably. Instead of being 3 payments behind, you're now ahead by several months." She pulled out a document and slid it across the table to him. "This is an updated statement of your account status. As you can see, you're in good standing for the first time in nearly 2 years." Daniel scanned the document, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The numbers confirmed what he already knew. Intellectually, the immediate threat of foreclosure had been removed. Yet seeing it in official form made it real in a way that the deposit itself hadn't. "We would, of course, encourage you to maintain regular payments going forward," Meredith continued in her professional tone. "But this development is certainly positive." Daniel looked up from the statement. "I'm working on ensuring more stable income," he said, thinking of Elizabeth's job offer. "This commission is just the beginning." Meredith nodded, her expression softening slightly. "That's good to hear, Mr. Harper. The bank doesn't want to foreclose on family farms. It's not good business or good community relations. We'd much rather see you succeed." There was sincerity in her voice that surprised Daniel. He'd viewed Meredith and the bank as adversaries for so long that he'd forgotten they might have interests aligned with his own. "I appreciate that," he said, and found that he meant it. After Meredith left, Daniel returned to the barn with renewed purpose. The bank visit had been a tangible confirmation of his changed circumstances, at least in the short term. Now he needed to decide about the long-term proposition, Elizabeth's job offer. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of creative activity. Daniel alternated between refining his wheelbarrow design and tending to essential farm tasks. By evening, he had completed detailed sketches and a list of materials needed for a prototype. Tomorrow he would begin the physical construction, transforming his ideas into a tangible model. As the sun set over his fields, Daniel sat on the porch steps with a cold beer, watching the lengthening shadows and considering his options. The commission check had bought him time and relief from immediate pressure. He could decline Elizabeth's job offer and continue as he had been, struggling but independent. Yet something about her words resonated with him. The idea that his solutions born of necessity and ingenuity could benefit other farmers facing similar challenges appealed to a part of him that valued community and legacy. His father and grandfather had often shared their innovations informally with neighboring farmers. Was working with AgriNovat really so different, just on a larger scale? The question followed him into dreams filled with fields of golden corn stretching to the horizon, interspersed with gleaming metal contraptions that somehow combined the best aspects of traditional farming tools with futuristic efficiency. The following morning brought rain, gentle, soaking precipitation that was exactly what his fields needed. Daniel stood at the kitchen window, watching water stream down the glass, and feeling a sense of alignment between the natural world and his circumstances for the first time in recent memory. He spent the morning in the barn, beginning construction on the prototype wheelbarrow. The rain provided a perfect excuse to focus on this indoor work, and he lost himself in the familiar rhythms of measuring, cutting, and assembling. By mid-afternoon, the basic frame was taking shape, already showing the innovations he'd sketched the previous day. The sound of a vehicle pulling into his driveway barely registered at first, muffled by the rain and his concentration. When it finally penetrated his awareness, Daniel set down his tools with a sigh. 2 visitors in as many days was unusual for his isolated farm. He stepped out of the barn, prepared to direct whatever salesperson or lost traveler had arrived toward the main road. Instead, he froze in momentary shock at the sight before him. Not 1 but 3 black SUVs identical to the one Elizabeth had arrived in yesterday were parked in his yard. Men in dark suits were erecting large canopy tents with remarkable efficiency, creating a covered area between the vehicles. Equipment was being unloaded: computers, display stands, and what appeared to be prototypes of various agricultural tools. From the center SUV emerged Elizabeth, again impeccably dressed, this time with a tablet computer in hand. She spotted Daniel and waved, then hurried toward him under the shelter of an umbrella held by her chauffeur. "Mr. Harper," she called as she approached. "I hope you don't mind the invasion. The weather forecast suggested we'd need shelter for this presentation." "Presentation?" Daniel echoed, bewildered. Elizabeth reached him, her expression animated with an enthusiasm that seemed at odds with her corporate appearance. "Yes, I realized after leaving yesterday that telling you about AgriNovat's mission isn't nearly as effective as showing you, so I've brought a mobile demonstration of some of our current projects." Before Daniel could respond, more vehicles appeared on his driveway: familiar pickup trucks and SUVs belonging to neighboring farmers. His confusion must have shown on his face, because Elizabeth smiled apologetically. "I also took the liberty of inviting some local farmers who might benefit from seeing our work," she explained. "I hope that's all right. Your farm seemed like the perfect venue, given its central location in the community." Daniel was speechless as he watched his neighbors, men and women he'd known all his life, but had gradually withdrawn from as his financial struggles intensified, file into the yard. They nodded greetings to him, their expressions mixing curiosity about the corporate presence with surprise at being invited onto the Harper farm, which had become increasingly isolated in recent years. "You should have asked me first," Daniel finally managed, his voice low enough that only Elizabeth could hear. "You're right," she acknowledged without defensiveness. "I apologize for the presumption. If you want us to leave, we will, though it might be awkward now that your neighbors have arrived." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, feeling cornered but reluctantly impressed by Elizabeth's strategic maneuvering. "No, it's fine. Just unexpected." Elizabeth's relief was visible. "Thank you. I promise this will be worth your time." She hesitated, then added, "And it might help you understand what partnering with AgriNovat would really mean." Over the next hour, Daniel's barnyard transformed into a high-tech agricultural showcase. Under the hastily erected tents, Elizabeth's team demonstrated prototypes of innovative farming, tool seed drills that adapted to soil conditions in real time, irrigation systems that reduced water usage by up to 40%, and soil sensors that provided detailed analysis accessible through smartphone applications. What struck Daniel most, however, was not the technology itself, but the design philosophy behind it. Each innovation addressed practical problems faced by small to medium-sized farms, with considerations for cost, durability, and ease of maintenance prominently featured in the presentations. All of these prototypes were developed with input from working farmers, Elizabeth explained to the gathered group. At AgriNova, we believe that the most useful innovations come from collaboration between those facing daily agricultural challenges and those with the resources to develop solutions at scale. As she spoke, Daniel noticed his neighbors' reactions. Initially, skeptical rural communities had seen plenty of corporate entities promising agricultural revolutions that mainly benefited shareholders. They were gradually engaging with the presentations, asking pointed questions that revealed their own struggles with drought, equipment costs, and market pressures. Elizabeth and her team answered each question directly, acknowledging limitations and challenges without the glossy corporate spin Daniel had expected. When one farmer pointed out a design flaw in an irrigation component, the engineer leading that presentation didn't become defensive, but instead pulled out a notebook and began discussing potential solutions. By mid-afternoon, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the atmosphere had transformed from skeptical wariness to engaged interest. Farmers clustered around different displays, sharing their experiences and suggestions with the AgriNova team. Daniel found himself drawn into these conversations despite his initial resistance, offering insights from his own struggles with similar issues. "This is the magic we're trying to capture," Elizabeth said quietly, appearing at his side as he examined a modular harvesting attachment. "The wisdom that comes from years of hands-on experience, tempered by the realities of weather, economics, and mechanical limitations." Daniel studied her face, searching for signs of corporate insincerity, but finding only genuine enthusiasm. "You could hire consultants for that," he pointed out. "Professional farmers with advanced degrees and perfect operations." Elizabeth shook her head. "Those aren't the innovators. The real innovations come from farms like yours where necessity drives creativity." She gestured around the barnyard. "Every farmer here has developed workarounds and solutions that no engineer in a sterile laboratory would conceive. That's what we want to tap into and amplify." As the event began to wind down, and farmers drifted back to their vehicles, several stopped to speak with Daniel. There were questions about his sudden connection to AgriNova, but also expressions of respect for the innovations they'd seen around his farm during their visit: the custom irrigation system, the modified tractor attachments, the efficient storage solutions in his barn. Frank Lawson, whose 1,000-acre operation dwarfed Daniel's modest farm, lingered longer than the others. "You've been holding out on us, Harper," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Some of those modifications to your equipment there are smarter than what the manufacturers are selling." Daniel shrugged uncomfortably. "Just making do with what I have." "That's exactly what she's talking about," Frank replied, nodding toward Elizabeth, who was saying goodbye to other departing farmers. "The best ideas come from figuring out how to survive. Always have." He clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You should consider whatever she's offering you. Could be good for all of us." By early evening, the AgriNova team had packed up their display and departed, leaving only Elizabeth's SUV in the yard. The rain had stopped completely, and golden sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the wet landscape with an almost ethereal glow. "Thank you for your patience with our invasion," Elizabeth said as they stood near her vehicle. "I hope it gave you a better sense of what we're trying to accomplish." Daniel nodded slowly. "It was educational." He paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at him all afternoon. "Why me, though? There are thousands of farmers struggling to innovate with limited resources. What made you choose my farm for your wheelbarrow test?" Elizabeth's expression became more serious. "We didn't choose randomly. Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Harper. Local equipment dealers have mentioned your custom modifications. Extension service agents have noted your unusual approaches to, quote, irrigation and soil management." She smiled slightly. "You're something of a quiet legend in agricultural innovation circles." Daniel blinked in surprise. He'd never considered that his private solutions might be noticed beyond his own fenceline. "The wheelbarrow was a final test," Elizabeth continued. "We wanted to see how you approached a straightforward repair task. Would you simply fix it to factory specifications, or would you improve it?" Your response confirmed what we'd already suspected her, exactly the kind of practical innovator we want to partner with." End quote. She reached into her jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Here's the formal offer letter, including all the details we discussed yesterday. The signing bonus, salary, profit-sharing structure, and expectations are all outlined clearly." Daniel accepted the envelope, its weight seeming disproportionate to the few pages it contained. "Take your time reviewing it," Elizabeth said. "But I hope today has helped you understand that we're not looking to exploit your ideas. We're looking to amplify them, to make them available to farmers facing challenges similar to yours." She extended her hand. "I believe it could be a genuine partnership, beneficial to both of us." As they shook hands, Daniel found himself warming to the possibility more than he had expected. The afternoon's demonstrations had revealed an approach to agricultural innovation that aligned surprisingly well with his own values: practical, farmer-centered, and focused on sustainability for Family B operations rather than just corporate megafarms. After Elizabeth departed, Daniel sat on his porch steps again, this time with the offer letter in hand rather than a beer. The setting sun cast long shadows across his fields, which glistened with remnants of the day's rain. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider a future beyond mere survival, a future where his ideas might reach beyond the boundaries of his own land to help other farmers fighting similar battles. The weight of 4 generations of Harpers seemed to press on his shoulders as he contemplated change. What would his father say? His grandfather? Would they see partnership with a corporation as surrender or as evolution? With careful fingers, he opened the envelope and began to read the details of a potential new chapter in his life and in the life of the Harper farm. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Daniel divided his attention between farm tasks, the wheelbarrow prototype, and careful consideration of Elizabeth's offer. He read the contract multiple times, making notes of questions and potential concerns. The terms were more generous than he had initially realized, but the commitment was substantial. Agri Novad would have first rights to his innovations for a 5-year period, during which he would divide his time between his own farm and consulting work for the company. On the morning of the 4th day, Daniel rose early as usual, but with a sense of decision rather than habitual duty. After checking out his fields and livestock, he returned to the house and called the number on Elizabeth's business card. "Mr. Harper," she answered on the second ring, her voice warm. "I've been hoping to hear from you." "I have some questions about the contract," Daniel said, bypassing small talk. "Of course. Would you like to discuss them over the phone, or would you prefer to meet in person?" Daniel hesitated only briefly. "In person would be better. There are aspects of the prototype I'd like to show you as well." "Excellent. I can be at your farm by noon if that works for you." "That's fine," Daniel agreed and ended the call. At precisely noon, the now familiar black SUV appeared on his driveway. This time, Elizabeth arrived alone, dressed more casually than on her previous visits in slacks and a simple blouse, as if acknowledging that this meeting would involve more hands-on discussion. Daniel met her at the barn, where the prototype wheelbarrow sat in the center of his workspace, gleaming with fresh paint and new components. Elizabeth's eyes widened as she took in the modified design. "You've been busy," she commented, circling the prototype with evident interest. The wheelbarrow Daniel had created bore only a passing resemblance to the original. The basic concept, a single wheel with handles and a bucket for carrying loads, remained, but every aspect had been reconsidered and improved. The wheel was now a dual design, with an inner core of solid rubber surrounded by a replaceable outer tire. "The inner core means you'll never be completely stranded with a flat," Daniel explained, "while the outer tire can be easily replaced in the field using simple tools." He demonstrated the quick-release mechanism he'd designed that allowed tire changes without removing the wheel from the axle. The axle itself was a work of engineering art, reinforced at stress points, but using a flexible composite material at the connection points to absorb shock and prevent bending under heavy loads. Most innovative, however, was the load distribution system. Daniel had redesigned the bucket and handle arrangement to shift more weight over the wheel itself, reducing strain on the user's arms and back. "It carries 30% more weight with 40% less operator fatigue," he stated as Elizabeth tested the balance. "This is Elizabeth paused, clearly searching for an adequate description. Remarkable. Truly remarkable. How long did this take you to develop? 3 days for the prototype. Daniel replied with a shrug that belied the intense effort those days had entailed. Another week or two to refine it and prepare for small-scale production. Elizabeth shook her head in amazement. Our engineering team would have taken months to produce something this innovative, and it likely wouldn't work as well in actual field conditions. She straightened up from her examination of the wheelbarrow and met his gaze directly. This is exactly why we want you on our team, Mr. Harper. You solve problems differently than our conventionally trained engineers. You think in terms of practical application first, theoretical design second. Daniel acknowledged the compliment with a nod, then gestured toward the workbench, where he'd laid out the contract. I have some questions about the terms. For the next hour, they discussed the details of the proposed arrangement. Daniel's concerns centered primarily on maintaining sufficient time to manage his own farm while fulfilling his obligations to Agri Novat. Elizabeth was accommodating, suggesting modifications to the contract that would provide flexibility during critical farming periods and offering additional resources to help maintain the Harper farm during his consulting work. We don't want you to sacrifice your own operation, she emphasized. That would defeat the purpose of bringing a working farmer into our development process. As they finalized the details, Daniel felt the last of his resistance dissolving. The partnership offered benefits beyond the financial salvation of his farmette, provided an opportunity to extend the impact of his innovations far beyond what he could achieve alone. I think we have an agreement, he said finally, initialing the changes they'd negotiated and signing the bottom of the contract. Elizabeth's smile was both professional and genuinely pleased as she countersigned the document. Welcome to Agri Novat, Mr. Harper. I believe this is the beginning of a very productive partnership. As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Daniel felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at the financial security this provided, excitement about the work ahead, and a poignant awareness that he was steering the Harper legacy in a direction his ancestors could never have imagined. There's one more thing, Elizabeth said, releasing his hand. The wheelbarrow design exceeds all our expectations. We'd like to fast-track it for production, which means we'll need you to work with our engineering team starting next week. Is that possible? Daniel glanced around his farm, mentally cataloging the tasks that would need to be addressed before he could leave for even a few days. I can make it work, he decided. But I'll need help keeping things running here while I'm gone. Already arranged, Elizabeth replied promptly. Part of your compensation package includes farm management assistance during your consulting periods. We've contracted with an experienced management service that specializes in maintaining family farms during owners' absences. Once again, Daniel was struck by the thoroughness of her planning. You were pretty confident I'd say yes, weren't you? Elizabeth's expression became more measured. Hopeful, not confident. Agricultural innovation needs people like you, Mr. Harper, people who understand that the best technology isn't always the most complex or expensive, but the most appropriate for the actual conditions farmers face. As Elizabeth departed with the signed contract and detailed notes on the wheelbarrow prototype, Daniel remained in the barn, contemplating the rapid changes in his circumstances. Just a week ago, he had been a struggling farmer on the verge of losing everything his family had built over generations. Now, he was a consultant for one of the largest agricultural technology companies in the country, with his first innovation already slated for production. The irony wasn't lost on him. His financial salvation had come not from some dramatic technological breakthrough, but from a simple repair to a broken wheelbarrow. The very skills that had kept his farm limping along during the lean years: ingenuity, resourcefulness, practical problem-solving were now valued assets in a corporate environment. As the sun began to set, Daniel walked his fields one last time before darkness fell. The corn stood taller now after the recent rain, reaching toward the sky with renewed vigor. Like his crops, he too felt a sense of growth and potential that had been dormant during the years of struggle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adjustments as he balanced his traditional identity as a Harper farmer with his new role as an Agri Novat innovator. But for tonight, he allowed himself to simply appreciate the reprieve, the chance to continue his family's legacy while simultaneously expanding it in directions his ancestors could never have foreseen. The wheelbarrow sat in his barn, a tangible symbol of transition, a humble farm implement reimagined through necessity and insight, soon to help other farmers facing similar challenges across the country. From such small beginnings, significant changes could grow. Daniel Harper, descendant of generations of practical problem solvers, was about to discover just how far the seeds of innovation might spread when given the right conditions to flourish. 6 months later, Daniel stood in a manufacturing facility in Denver, watching as the first production run of the Harper Agri Novat multi-load wheelbarrow moved along the assembly line. His prototype had evolved through collaboration with the company's engineering team, but the core innovations remained intact: the dual-layer tire system, the reinforced axle, and the load-balancing design that reduced operator strain. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Elizabeth's voice came from beside him. She'd flown in specifically for this milestone, understanding its significance to Daniel as his first innovation transitioned from farm workshop to mass production. Daniel nodded, his eyes following each unit as components came together with mechanical precision. "Different from making one in my barn," he commented with deliberate understatement. Elizabeth laughed. "Just a bit." She handed him a tablet displaying the pre-order numbers. "These are from the first week since we announced the product." Daniel's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. Orders had come in from all 50 states and 12 countries, with particularly strong interest from small-scale farming operations and humanitarian organizations working in developing regions. "People really want a better wheelbarrow," he mused, still somewhat bemused by the enthusiastic market response to what he considered a straightforward improvement. "People want tools that respect their intelligence and address their actual needs," Elizabeth corrected. "That's what you've created, not just a better wheelbarrow, but a better approach to agricultural tool design." As they toured the remainder of the facility, Daniel was introduced to workers on the production line, many of whom expressed genuine appreciation for the practical aspects of his design. One supervisor, a former farmer himself, particularly praised the load-balancing feature. "My back would have appreciated this 20 years ago," he commented with a rueful grin. Later, over lunch in the company cafeteria, Elizabeth updated Daniel on the progress of his other projects with Agri Novat. The modified irrigation system based on his farm's design was in final development, with test installations planned for the coming growing season. His redesigned tractor attachments were moving through the prototype phase, with promising initial results. "The engineering team has a nickname for your division now," Elizabeth mentioned with an amused smile. "They call it practical magic. Your solutions seem obvious in retrospect, but somehow eluded our conventional design processes." Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with praise despite the months of corporate exposure. "It's just farm thinking. When you can't afford to replace something, you figure out how to improve it with what you have." "Exactly," Elizabeth agreed. "And that farm thinking is precisely what the agricultural technology sector has been missing. We've been so focused on high-tech solutions, GPs, drones, automated systems, that we've sometimes overlooked the fundamental improvements needed in basic tools and approaches." End quote. As they finished lunch, Elizabeth's expression became more serious. "I wanted to show you something before you head back to Oak Ridge Valley tomorrow." She led him to her office, where she pulled up a presentation on her computer. "These are satellite images of your region, comparing last year to this year." Daniel leaned in, immediately recognizing the patchwork of farms that made up his community. The difference between the images was striking. Last year's showed large areas of brown amid the green, indicating struggling crops and fallow fields. This year's image showed much more consistent greenery, with fewer signs of agricultural distress. "The drought hasn't fully broken," Elizabeth explained, "but the implementation of your irrigation modifications has helped several farms maintain production despite the continuing water limitations." Daniel felt a surge of quiet pride. When he'd agreed to share his irrigation innovations with neighboring farms as part of a pilot program, he hadn't expected such visible results so quickly. "There's more," Elizabeth continued, switching to a spreadsheet. "Economic indicators for the region are showing improvement as well. Farm bankruptcies are down 20% compared to projected numbers, and equipment repossessions have decreased by similar margins." She turned to face him directly. Your innovations aren't just helping individual farmers save money or reduce physical strain. They're helping preserve family farming as a viable way of life in communities like yours. Daniel absorbed this information slowly, its significance gradually sinking in. When he'd signed on with AgriNovat, he'd been primarily focused on saving his own farm and perhaps making a modest contribution to agricultural technology. The broader impact Elizabeth was describing hadn't been part of his calculations. "That's good to hear," he said finally, his understated response masking the profound effect her words had on him. The return journey to Oak Ridge Valley the following day gave Daniel time to reflect on the past 6 months. His life had developed a new rhythm, weeks spent on his own farm, alternating with periods at AgriNovat's Regional Development Center, where he collaborated with engineers and other farmer consultants on a growing portfolio of practical innovations. The Harper farm itself had undergone a transformation. With the financial pressure relieved by his AgriNovat income, Daniel had been able to make long-deferred repairs and strategic improvements. The irrigation system now functioned at peak efficiency. The barn roof no longer leaked. The tractor had received necessary maintenance that had been postponed for years. More significant than these physical improvements, however, was the change in Daniel's relationship with his land and his community. What had been a desperate last stand, one man fighting to preserve a family legacy against overwhelming odds, had become something different, a testing ground for innovations that might help preserve not just his farm, many others like it. As he drove the final stretch of road toward his property, Daniel noticed changes in neighboring farms as well. Frank Lawson's place sported the new irrigation controllers developed from Daniel's prototype. The Rodriguez operation down the valley had installed the modified tractor attachments currently in late-stage development for wider release. Pulling into his own driveway, Daniel was surprised to see an unfamiliar truck parked near his house. A young woman in work clothes was examining his custom-built storage system for specialized tools, making notes on a tablet. "Can I help you?" he called as he stepped from his vehicle. The woman turned, recognition lighting her face. "Mr. Harper, I didn't expect you back until tomorrow." She extended her hand. "I'm Amelia Chen, from AgriNovat's Educational Outreach Division." Daniel shook her hand, puzzlement evident in his expression. "Educational outreach?" "Yes, sir. Ms. Morgan Westfield didn't mention it? We're developing instructional materials based on your innovations for agricultural education programs, high schools, community colleges, extension services." She gestured to the storage system she'd been examining. "This design, for instance, it's perfect for teaching principles of efficient workshop organization. Simple, but incredibly effective." Daniel absorbed this new development with a mix of surprise and cautious pride. The idea that his practical solutions, born of necessity and developed through years of hands-on experience, might be taught to the next generation of farmers was both unexpected and deeply satisfying. "I'd be happy to show you how it works," he offered, sliding back into the familiar role of problem solver rather than corporate consultant. For the remainder of the afternoon, Daniel guided Amelia through various systems and modifications around his farm, explaining the reasoning behind each innovation and the practical benefits they provided. Her questions were insightful, focused not just on what he had built, but on the thinking process that had led to each solution. "You know," she commented as they finished the tour, "what makes your approaches so valuable for educational purposes is that they start with understanding the problem rather than applying predetermined solutions. That's a fundamental principle we're trying to instill in agricultural education." After Amelia departed, Daniel sat on his porch as the day's light faded, contemplating this latest evolution of his partnership with AgriNovat. When Elizabeth had first appeared with her legal team and job offer, he had viewed the arrangement primarily as financial salvation, a way to save his farm and perhaps help a few other farmers through commercialized innovations. The reality had proven both broader and deeper. His practical solutions, developed in isolation during years of struggle, were now rippling outward in ways he couldn't have anticipated, helping neighboring farms remain viable, influencing the design philosophy of a major agricultural technology company, and now potentially shaping the education of future farmers. As darkness settled over his fields, Daniel experienced a profound sense of connection that had been absent during the years of solitary struggle. The Harper legacy wasn't just being preserved, it was being extended, transmitted beyond the boundaries of these acres, to touch farms and farmers he would never meet. The wheelbarrow that had started it all was now in production, soon to be a tool in the hands of farmers facing challenges similar to those he had confronted. The irrigation systems, the storage solutions, the equipment modifications, all were beginning journeys of their own, evolving and adapting as they met the needs of diverse agricultural operations. Daniel Harper, once isolated in his desperate battle to save his family farm, had unwittingly become part of a larger story, one about preserving not just individual farms, but the practical wisdom and innovative spirit that had characterized American agriculture since its beginnings. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Daniel allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The path ahead would not be without challenges, balancing his consulting work with the demands of his own farm, navigating the corporate world that still felt foreign to his nature, maintaining his independence while benefiting from partnership. But for the first time in years, those challenges seemed like opportunities rather than threats. From a broken wheelbarrow to a reimagined future, the journey had been as unexpected as it was transformative. And like the best agricultural innovations, it had begun with a simple need, a practical problem, and the insights born of necessity, meeting opportunity on a dusty rural road. 1 year to the day after Elizabeth Morgan Westfield had appeared on his property with a supposedly broken wheelbarrow, Daniel Harper stood before an audience of several hundred people at AgriNovat's annual Rural Innovation Summit. The event, held in a converted warehouse in Chicago, brought together farmers, engineers, investors, and agricultural policy experts for 3 days of presentations and discussions focused on the future of farming. Daniel, dressed in what Elizabeth had teasingly called his compromise outfit, good jeans and a button-down shirt rather than either his work clothes or the suit the marketing department had suggested, was the keynote speaker for the summit's opening session. It was a role he had initially resisted, uncomfortable with public speaking and skeptical about the value of his perspective in such a forum. Now, as he surveyed the attentive faces before him, he recognized the importance of what he represented, a bridge between the practical realities of working farms and the technological resources of corporate agriculture. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady despite his lingering discomfort with the spotlight, "I was a struggling farmer, with a failing irrigation system and more debt than hope. Today, I'm still a farmer that hasn't changed, and never will. But I'm also part of something larger, something I never anticipated." He described the encounter with Elizabeth and the wheelbarrow repair that had launched this unexpected chapter in his life. The audience listened with engaged attention, particularly the farmers, who nodded in recognition at his descriptions of making do with limited resources and finding innovative solutions to daily challenges. "What I've learned over this past year," Daniel continued, "is that the most valuable innovations in agriculture often don't come from laboratories or corporate headquarters. They come from fields and barns and workshops, from farmers facing real problems with limited means to solve them." He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing the multi-load wheelbarrow that had been his first commercial product with AgriNovat. This started as a simple repair, using a tractor tire to replace a standard wheelbarrow tire because that's what I had available. But in making that repair, I saw opportunities for improvement that might not have been visible to someone who hadn't spent years moving heavy loads across uneven farm terrain. The presentation progressed through the various innovations that had emerged from the partnership, the irrigation systems, equipment modifications, storage solutions, and maintenance techniques that had been developed and refined over the past year. "What makes these effective," Daniel emphasized, "isn't complex technology or expensive materials. It's practical insight into the actual conditions of farming, the way tools are used day after day, year after year, in all weather conditions, often by people who are already tired from a dozen other tasks." As he concluded his prepared remarks, Daniel departed from the script that had been carefully crafted with the help of AgriNovat's communications team. "I want to be clear about something," he said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "This partnership works because it's genuinely reciprocal. Agri Novat provides resources, engineering expertise, and distribution capabilities that I could never access on my own. In return, I and other farmer consultants provide insights that can't be gained from a distance." He looked directly at Elizabeth, seated in the front row. "The key is mutual respect. My solutions are devalued because they come from practical experience rather than formal education. And corporate resources aren't dismissed as irrelevant to real farming conditions. When those two worlds collaborate with genuine respect, everyone benefits, especially the farmers who are trying to feed a growing population while preserving their way of life." End quote. The applause that followed was enthusiastic, with many farmers in the audience standing in recognition of sentiments that resonated with their own experiences. During the question and answer session that followed, Daniel found himself fielding inquiries, not just about specific innovations, but about the collaborative model itself, how it might be expanded, refined, and applied to other aspects of agricultural development. After the session concluded, Daniel found himself surrounded by attendees eager to share their own experiences and insights. A farmer from Nebraska described a modification to harvest equipment that had saved his operation thousands in maintenance costs. An engineer from a competing agricultural technology company asked detailed questions about the process of translating field-developed solutions into commercially viable products. Elizabeth eventually rescued him from the crowd, guiding him to a quieter area where refreshments had been set up for presenters. "That was exceptional," she told him, her professional demeanor softening with genuine appreciation. "Especially your unscripted conclusion. It captured exactly what we're trying to build." Daniel accepted a bottle of water from a passing server, suddenly aware of how dry his throat had become during the extended discussions. "I meant what I said," he replied. "This only works because it's genuinely mutual." Elizabeth nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We're expanding the Farmer Consultant Program based on the success of your participation. 20 new consultants will be joining over the next quarter, representing diverse agricultural operations from Ball across the country." The summit continued for 3 days, with Daniel participating in panel discussions, workshops, and informal conversations that ranged from highly technical engineering challenges to broader questions about the future of family farming. By the final session, he had overcome much of his initial discomfort with the corporate setting, recognizing that his practical perspective was not just tolerated but actively valued in these discussions. The closing event was a demonstration of upcoming innovations, with prototype equipment set up in the warehouse's expansive main floor. Daniel found himself drawn to a display featuring a soil analysis system that allowed real-time assessment of nutrient levels, moisture content, and compaction metrics. "The sensors are still too expensive for widespread adoption," the young engineer explained as Daniel examined the equipment. "But we're working on reducing costs while maintaining accuracy." Daniel studied the system, his mind already considering alternatives to the expensive components. "Have you looked at adapting existing moisture meters? The ones used in construction are much less expensive and could be modified for agricultural use." The engineer blinked in surprise, then pulled out a tablet and made a quick note. "That's actually a really interesting approach. Would you be willing to discuss it further with our development team?" And so it went, a continuous exchange of ideas, challenges, and perspectives that gradually bridged the gap between corporate innovation and practical farming realities. By the time Daniel boarded his flight back to Oak Ridge Valley, he carried not just contacts and potential collaborations, but a deeper understanding of his own role in this evolving landscape. The Harper farm awaited his return, its fields green with early summer growth, its operations now a blend of traditional practices and innovative approaches. The bank account that had once teetered on the edge of insolvency now showed a comfortable balance, with quarterly royalty payments supplementing his consultant's salary. More satisfying than the financial stability, however, was the sense of purpose that had emerged from this unexpected partnership. The Harper legacy continued, not just in the preservation of the family farm, but in the dissemination of practical wisdom that might help preserve other family farms facing similar challenges. As the plane began its descent toward the regional Basher airport nearest his home, Daniel gazed out at the patchwork of agricultural land below, fields and farms stretching to the horizon, each with its own story of struggle and adaptation. Somewhere down there, farmers were using equipment he had helped design, applying techniques he had helped refine, perhaps finding a bit more security in their chosen way of life as a result. From a broken wheelbarrow to a reimagined future for rural innovation, the journey had been as unpredictable as farming itself. With its constant interplay of challenge and response, problem and solution. And like the best innovations in agriculture, it had begun with something simple. The meeting of necessity and opportunity on a dusty rural road, where a struggling farmer had fixed a flat wheelbarrow. Unaware that its owner was a billionaire farm advocate with the vision to recognize the value in practical solutions. That wheelbarrow, now evolved into the best-selling multi-load model, had become a symbol within ingeniously of their new approach to agricultural innovation grounded in practical realities, responsive to actual farmer needs, and designed for the conditions that existed rather than those that might be ideal. And for Daniel Harper, it remained a reminder that solutions often appear in unexpected forms, arising from the very challenges that seem most insurmountable. As the plane touched down, and Daniel prepared to return to the rhythms of farm life, now interwoven with his consulting responsibilities, he carried with him a deepened appreciation for the reciprocal nature of true innovation. The corporate resources and engineering expertise of ingeniously had given his practical insights a reach far beyond what he could have achieved alone. And his grounded perspective had helped redirect the company's technological capabilities towards solutions that made a meaningful difference in farmers' daily lives. The partnership that had begun with a simple repair continued to evolve, expanding to include more farmer consultants, more collaborative projects, and more innovations that bridged the gap between high-tech possibilities and on-the-ground realities. In that evolution lay hope not just for the Harper farm, but for the broader agricultural community, a promise that with the right combination of practical wisdom and technological resources, family farming might not just survive, but thrive in the challenging decades ahead. 3 years after the fateful wheelbarrow repair, Daniel Harper stood in his eastern field, watching as a demonstration of the new Harper ingeniously precision irrigation system took place for a group of regional farmers. The system, evolved from his makeshift solutions during the drought years, now incorporated advanced sensors and distribution mechanisms, while maintaining the fundamental simplicity and durability that had characterized his original design. The key advantage, he explained to the gathered farmers, comfortable now in his dual role as practitioner and innovator, is that it reduces water usage by targeting delivery precisely where and when it's needed, but without requiring complex computer controls that can fail at critical moments. The farmers nodded in understanding, their expressions reflecting the perpetual calculation of cost versus benefit that defined modern agricultural decision-making. These were Daniel's people, men and women who measured the value of innovation not in technical specifications, but in practical impact on daily operations. From the edge of the field, Elizabeth watched the demonstration with evident satisfaction. The collaboration she had initiated with that deliberate, broken wheelbarrow had evolved into a cornerstone of ingeniously's business model, with farmer-consultant partnerships now driving much of the company's product development. After the demonstration concluded and the visiting farmers departed, Elizabeth joined Daniel as he shut down the irrigation equipment. The regional sales figures came in this morning, she told him. The precision system is outselling our closest competitor by 30%, despite their more advanced technology on paper. Daniel nodded, unsurprised. Farmers don't buy specifications. They buy solutions to real problems. And they're rightfully suspicious of technology that can fail them when they need it most. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Elizabeth reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 3 years, not just in the Harper farm, which now served as a living laboratory for practical agricultural innovation, but in ingeniously itself. The company's approach to product development had fundamentally shifted, with farmer consultants involved from initial concept through final design and implementation. The board meeting went well last week, she mentioned as they reached the yard. The Farmer Consultant Program has been approved for global expansion. We're looking at partnerships in developing regions where resource constraints create entirely different sets of challenges. Daniel considered this with interest. His own travels for AgriNovat had so far been limited to North America, where the challenges of modern farming were at least familiar in their general contours. Global expansion would bring encounters with agricultural practices and problems that might stretch even his adaptive thinking. Could be valuable, he acknowledged. Different constraints lead to different solutions. Might be innovations happening in those regions that we could learn from as well. Elizabeth smiled at his characteristically understated response. Over the years, she had learned to recognize the thoughtful consideration behind Daniel's measured words. That's exactly our thinking. It's not about exporting our solutions to different contexts, it's about creating a global exchange of practical innovations adapted to specific conditions. They reached the porch of the farmhouse, which had undergone its own transformation. The peeling paint and worn steps had been replaced, the cracked window panes renewed. Like the rest of the Harper farm, the house now reflected not prosperity so much as stability, the possibility of maintenance and care, rather than the forced neglect of financial crisis. "And I have something else to discuss with you," Elizabeth said, as they settled into the porch chairs that had become their customary meeting spot over the years. "The company is creating a new position, Director of Practical Innovation. It would involve overseeing all the farmer consultant programs, guiding product development priorities, and essentially ensuring that AgriNovat never loses sight of the real-world conditions our solutions need to address." Daniel raised an eyebrow, immediately seeing where this was heading. "Sounds like a corporate job." Elizabeth nodded, acknowledging his wariness. "It would involve more time at headquarters, yes. But it would also give you the authority to shape the entire approach to innovation across all our product lines." She paused, then added the critical detail. "And we would establish the directorate here, not at corporate headquarters. Your farm would become the official center for practical innovation, with support staff and development facilities added to your existing operations." Daniel leaned back in his chair, absorbing this unexpected proposition. The journey from struggling farmer to corporate consultant had already taken him far beyond his expected path. This new role would represent another significant evolution, one that would further intertwine the Harper farm legacy with the future of agricultural innovation on a global scale. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally, "and understand exactly how it would affect day-to-day operations here." Elizabeth had anticipated this response. From a folder beside her chair, she produced a detailed proposal outlining the structure of the new directorate, the resources that would be allocated to the Harper farm to support its expanded role, and the balance of responsibilities between farm management and corporate leadership. As Daniel reviewed the document, his expression remained thoughtful, but increasingly engaged. The proposal addressed many of his likely concerns, preserving the working farm aspect of his operation, ensuring he maintained control over how his land was used, providing the necessary support staff to handle administrative functions that might otherwise pull him away from practical innovation work. "This could work," he acknowledged finally, looking up from the document. "It would change things around here, but possibly for the better in terms of what we're trying to accomplish." The "we" wasn't lost on Elizabeth over the years. Daniel had gradually shifted from viewing AgriNovat as an external entity to seeing himself as an integral part of its mission, particularly as that mission had evolved under his influence. "Take some time to consider it," she suggested, rising to leave. "The board doesn't need an answer until the quarterly meeting next month." After Elizabeth departed, Daniel remained on the porch as evening settled over his land. The fields that had once represented burden and anxiety now embodied possibility and purpose. The farm equipment, once held together by desperation and ingenuity, now served as prototypes for innovations that might benefit farmers worldwide. The changes had extended beyond the physical aspects of the farm to Daniel himself. The isolated struggle to preserve his family's legacy had transformed into a collaborative effort to strengthen not just the Harper farm, but countless operations facing similar challenges. The practical problem-solving skills that had once merely helped him survive were now recognized as valuable contributions to agricultural advancement. As darkness fell, Daniel made his decision. The directorship represented not a departure from the Harper farming tradition, but its evolution, an opportunity to extend the legacy of practical innovation that had sustained this land through 4 generations into Farah. The broader context, touching fields and farmers far beyond the boundaries of Oak Ridge Valley. The integration of the Agri Novat Practical Innovation Directorate with the Harper Farm took place gradually over the following 6 months. A modest but state-of-the-art development facility was constructed behind the main barn, designed to complement rather than contrast with the traditional farm buildings. Additional staff engineers, agricultural specialists, and administrative personnel became regular presences on the property, their work rhythms gradually synchronizing with the seasonal patterns of farm operations. For Daniel, the transition brought both challenges and rewards. Corporate responsibilities demanded more of his attention, with virtual meetings and occasional travel to regional offices or implementation sites. Yet the presence of the directorate on his own land allowed him to remain connected to the daily realities of farming that informed his most valuable insights. The arrangement also created unexpected benefits for the surrounding community. The directorate brought jobs, research opportunities, and educational initiatives to Oak Ridge Valley. Local farmers, once skeptical of corporate involvement in their region, found themselves actively engaged in testing and refining innovations designed with their specific challenges in mind. 5 years to the day after Elizabeth Morgan Westfield had arrived with her supposedly broken wheelbarrow, a ceremony was held at the Harper Farm to commemorate the establishment of the Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation, a permanent research and development facility that would ensure the continuation of the practical innovation approach regardless of corporate leadership changes or market fluctuations. The attendees included Agri Novat executives, regional farmers, agricultural educators, and government representatives interested in the model being developed. Daniel, still uncomfortable with formal ceremonies despite years of public speaking and corporate engagement, kept his remarks brief and focused on the fundamental philosophy that had guided this journey. Innovation doesn't just come from laboratories or boardrooms, he told the assembled group. It emerges from necessity, from practical challenges faced with limited resources, from the accumulated wisdom of generations working the land. What we've built here isn't about replacing that traditional knowledge with technology. It's about honoring it, amplifying it, and ensuring it continues to shape the future of farming. As he spoke, Daniel was acutely aware of the wheelbarrow displayed prominently near the podium. Not the mass-produced multi-load model that had become Agri Novat's best-selling product, but the original prototype he had created in his barn, with its repurposed tractor tire and reinforced axle. It stood as a tangible reminder of how significant change could emerge from humble beginnings, how practical solutions to immediate problems could evolve into innovations with far-reaching impact. Elizabeth joined him at the podium for the unveiling of the center's dedication plaque. The inscription read simply, "The Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation where necessity meets opportunity." As applause filled the air, Daniel's gaze drifted beyond the ceremony to his fields, where crops grew in orderly rows, nourished by irrigation systems evolved from his desperate drought-time improvisations. Beyond those fields lay other farms, and beyond those, countless agricultural operations around the world, each facing unique challenges. Each a potential source of practical wisdom that might, with the right support and recognition, develop into innovations benefiting many. The journey that had begun with a flat wheelbarrow and a farmer's practical solution had expanded far beyond what either Daniel or Elizabeth had initially envisioned. What had started as a desperate repair to help a stranger had evolved into a model for collaborative innovation that bridged the gap between corporate resources and practical farming realities. And at its heart remained the same fundamental principle. The most valuable agricultural innovations often emerged from the necessity-driven ingenuity of those working the land day after day, season after day. Season. As the ceremony concluded and the attendees dispersed to tour the new facilities, Daniel found a quiet moment with Elizabeth near the original wheelbarrow prototype. "Did you really need that tire fixed?" he asked, the question that had occasionally surfaced in his mind over the years. Or was the whole thing staged from the beginning? Elizabeth's smile held both mischief and sincerity. The wheelbarrow genuinely needed repair, she assured him. But I had research due before arriving. Your reputation for innovative solutions was already circulating among agricultural extension agents and equipment dealers. The wheelbarrow was both a legitimate need and an opportunity to see your problem-solving approach firsthand. Daniel nodded, satisfied with this explanation that balanced calculated strategy with genuine necessity, much like the partnership that had developed between them, a deliberate collaboration that addressed real needs. 5 years ago, I was 3 months away from losing this farm, he reflected, gazing at the thriving operation that surrounded them. Now it's not just secure, but serving a purpose larger than I ever imagined, and helping far more farmers than you could have on your own, Elizabeth added. That's the power of finding the right partnership. It amplifies the impact of what each brings to the table. As they walked together toward the new research center, where the future of practical agricultural innovation would continue to evolve, Daniel reflected on the unexpected journey that had led to this moment. What had begun as a simple act of helping a stranger with a broken wheelbarrow had opened a path to preserving not just the Harper farm, but the practical wisdom of generations of farmers, a legacy now extending far beyond the boundaries of his own land to touch fields and farmers around the world. The wheelbarrow repair that had seemed so minor at the time had been the first step on a journey neither of them could have foreseen, a journey of mutual respect and collaborative innovation that continued to unfold in ways that honored both the practical realities of farming and the possibilities of thoughtful technological advancement. From such small beginnings, significant changes had grown in the Harper farm, in AgriNovat's approach to innovation, and in the broader landscape of agricultural development. And at the heart of these changes remained the simple truth that Elizabeth had recognized in Daniel's workshop years before. Sometimes, the most powerful innovations arise from necessity, from making do with what's available, from the practical wisdom born of daily engagement with the challenging realities of working the land. As the sun began to set over the Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation, casting long shadows across fields that had been in his family for generations, Daniel felt a profound sense of continuity. Amid transformation, the legacy of Harper farmers continued, evolved but unbroken, still rooted in the soil of Oak Ridge Valley, but now branching out to nourish innovation far beyond its boundaries. The struggling farmer who had fixed a flat wheelbarrow, unaware that its owner was a billionaire farm advocate, had found not just financial salvation, but purpose and impact beyond anything he could have imagined. And the billionaire who had recognized the value in that simple repair had discovered a model for innovation that connected corporate resources with practical wisdom in ways that benefited both. Together, they had built something that honored the past while creating new possibilities for the future, a collaboration that began with a broken wheelbarrow and led to a reimagined approach to agricultural innovation. One practical solution at a time. 10 years after the fateful wheelbarrow repair, the Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation had become an internationally recognized hub for farmer-centered technology development. Researchers and agricultural specialists from around the world came to study the collaborative model pioneered there, while farmers from 6 continents participated in the expanded consultant program, sharing their regional challenges and solutions. Daniel Harper, now in his early 50s, still lived in the farmhouse where generations of Harpers had resided before him. Though his role had evolved dramatically from struggling farmer to global innovation director, he maintained hands-on involvement with both his own crops and the development work occurring alongside them. On a crisp autumn morning, Daniel stood at the edge of his eastern field, observing a demonstration of the latest Harper AgriNovat system, an integrated approach to soil health management that combined traditional rotation practices with precision monitoring and targeted bee interventions. The technology was sophisticated, but its implementation was deliberately straightforward, accessible to farmers with varying levels of technical expertise and financial resources. Beside him stood not Elizabeth Morgan Westfield, who had moved on to become AgriNovat's CEO 3 years earlier, but a young farmer from a developing region in Southeast Asia. Lian Chen had traveled to the Harper Center as part of an exchange program that connected innovative farmers from resource-constrained environments with the development resources of the center. The monitoring equipment seems expensive, Lyon observed as they watched the demonstration. Would this be practical for smallhold farmers in my region? It was exactly the kind of question Daniel valued most, a direct challenge to ensure that innovations remained accessible to those who needed them most. The current configuration is designed for larger operations, Daniel acknowledged. But we're developing a scaled version that uses simpler components and shared monitoring infrastructure. He gestured toward a separate demonstration area where a more basic version of the system was being tested. That's where your input would be particularly valuable, helping us understand how to adapt the core principles to different scales and resource levels. As they walked toward the simplified system, Daniel reflected on how the collaborative approach had evolved over the decade. What had begun as his individual consulting relationship with AgriNovat had expanded into a global network of farmer innovators, each contributing insights from their specific agricultural contexts. The Harper Center itself had grown accordingly, with specialized facilities for different agricultural sectors and climatic conditions. Yet throughout this expansion, Daniel had insisted on maintaining the working farm at the heart of the operation, a constant reminder that all innovations must ultimately serve the practical realities of agricultural production. Later that afternoon, Daniel participated in a virtual conference with farmer consultants from 5 continents, discussing adaptations of the soil health management system for vastly different agricultural environments. The conversation flowed easily between highly technical specifications and practical implementation challenges, with farmers from developing regions offering insights that often prompted reconsideration of approaches developed in more resource-rich contexts. As the meeting concluded, Daniel received a calendar notification reminding him of a special event scheduled for the following day, the 10th anniversary celebration of the multi-load wheelbarrow, the product that had launched the entire Practical Innovation Initiative. The celebration, held in the center's main exhibition hall, brought together representatives from throughout the agricultural technology sector, many of whom had initially dismissed the farmer consultant model as too limited for significant innovation. The display at the center of the hall told a different story, a progression of products developed through the collaborative approach, each addressing fundamental farming challenges with practical solutions informed by direct experience. Elizabeth arrived mid-morning, her corporate responsibilities having delayed her participation. As CEO of AgriNovat, she now presided over an organization transformed by the practical innovation approach that had begun with that single wheelbarrow repair. 10 years, she marveled as she joined Daniel beside the display of the original wheelbarrow prototype, preserved now as a symbol of the initiative's origins. When I brought that wheelbarrow to your farm, I hoped we might develop a more effective consulting model. I never imagined it would evolve into this. She gestured around the hall, where dozens of innovations developed through the Farmer Consultant Network were on display. Daniel nodded, still characteristically understated despite the evident success surrounding them. It worked because it was mutual from the beginning. You recognized the value in practical experience, and I came to appreciate what corporate resources could accomplish when properly directed. The formal ceremony that followed included presentations on the global impact of the practical innovation model, statistics on adoption rates, productivity improvements, and sustainability outcomes across diverse agricultural regions. Particularly notable were the testimonials from farmers in developing areas who described how adapted versions of Harper AgriNovat innovations had addressed specific challenges in their local contexts. But it came time for Daniel's remarks. He returned to the philosophy that had guided the initiative from its beginning. The most valuable innovations often emerge not from abundance, but from constraint, he told the assembled audience. When resources are limited, creativity becomes essential. What we've built here isn't about imposing technological solutions on agricultural challenges. It's about recognizing and amplifying the practical wisdom that already exists in farming communities worldwide. As the formal celebrations concluded and attendees moved toward the reception area, Daniel found himself beside the commemorative display of the original wheelbarrow. Its repurposed tractor tire and reinforced axle seemed almost primitive now, compared to the sophisticated technology developed in subsequent years. Yet its fundamental design, principles durability, practical functionality, and appropriate technology continued to inform the center's approach to innovation. A young agricultural engineering student approached, studying the wheelbarrow with interest. "Is it true that this was the beginning of everything?" she asked. "Just fixing a broken tire?" Daniel smiled at the simplification, but nodded. "Sometimes, the most significant journeys start with very small steps. In this case, it was about recognizing that innovation doesn't always come from where you'd expect it. Sometimes it emerges from necessity, from making do with what's available, from practical solutions to immediate problems." The student considered this thoughtfully. "So, it's not just about the technology itself, but about the process of innovation understanding real needs before developing solutions." "Exactly," Daniel confirmed, pleased by her insight. "And recognizing that valuable knowledge exists everywhere in corporate research labs and village workshops, in agricultural universities and family farms that have worked the same land for generations." As the celebration continued around them, Daniel's thoughts drifted back to that hot summer day 10 years earlier, when a woman in overalls had arrived with a broken wheelbarrow and an unstated opportunity. The struggling farmer he had been could never have imagined how that simple repair would transform not just his own circumstances. His understanding of what was possible when practical wisdom and corporate resources combined with mutual respect and shared purpose. The decade that followed had brought challenges as well as achievements adapting to corporate responsibilities, while maintaining his farmer's perspective, navigating the complexities of global agricultural markets, balancing innovation with tradition. Yet through it all, the fundamental principle that had guided the initial wheelbarrow repair had remained constant. The best solutions emerged from understanding real needs and addressing them with appropriate, practical innovations. As Daniel moved to join Elizabeth and the other attendees at the reception, he carried with him the satisfaction of knowing that the Harper legacy had not merely been preserved, but expanded from a family tradition of practical problem-solving on a single farm to a global approach to agricultural innovation that honored the wisdom of farmers everywhere. From such small beginnings, significant changes had grown a testament to what could emerge when necessity met opportunity on a dusty rural road. With a struggling farmer and a billionaire farm advocate finding common ground in a flat wheelbarrow and the practical solution that fixed it. "To the next decade," Elizabeth proposed, as they shared a quiet moment away from the main celebration. "And to whatever innovations emerge from the global network we've built. To practical solutions for real challenges." Daniel responded, his simple toast encompassing the philosophy that had guided their collaboration from its unlikely beginning to its flourishing present and whatever future might unfold from the seeds they had planted together. 20 years after the wheelbarrow repair that had changed the course of his life, Daniel Harper stood at the edge of his eastern field, watching as a new generation took the reins of both the farm and the innovation center that had grown alongside it. His hair now silvered at the temples, his hands bearing the honorable marks of decades working both soil and technology, Daniel observed with quiet satisfaction as his nephew James directed a demonstration of the SACA latest soil health management system. The Harper farm had remained in family hands, its legacy continuing through James, who had grown up watching his uncle transform from a struggling farmer on the verge of foreclosure to an internationally respected pioneer in practical agricultural innovation. James embodied the evolution of the Harper farming tradition, educated in agricultural science, but grounded in practical experience, comfortable with advanced technology, but committed to its appropriate application. The Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation had evolved as well, now operating as a semi-independent foundation in partnership with AgriNovat and other agricultural technology companies. Its farmer consultant network spanned the globe, connecting innovative farmers from diverse contexts in a collaborative approach to addressing agricultural challenges. Elizabeth Morgan Westfield, recently retired as CEO of AgriNovat, but still active on the center's board, joined Daniel as they watched the demonstration from a respectful distance. "He reminds me of you," she observed, nodding toward James. The same practical perspective, but with fewer rough edges. Daniel smiled at the assessment. He had advantages I didn't, including seeing from the beginning that corporate resources and practical farming wisdom could work together rather than in opposition. The demonstration concluded, and James led the visiting agricultural delegates toward another section of the farm where different innovations were being tested. Daniel and Elizabeth remained behind, taking a moment to appreciate the legacy they had built together over 2 decades of collaboration. "Did you ever imagine it would grow into this?" Elizabeth asked, gesturing toward the extensive facilities that had gradually expanded around the original farm buildings, now housing research laboratories, educational spaces, and collaborative work areas where farmers and engineers develop solutions together. Daniel shook his head. "When you showed up with that wheelbarrow, I was just trying to save my own farm. The idea that fixing it would lead to all this." He gestured around them, where the Harper Center's operations blended seamlessly with the working farm that remained its foundation. They walked slowly toward the original barn, now preserved as both a functional workshop and a historical marker of where the Practical Innovation Initiative had begun. Inside, mounted on a simple display stand, was the prototype of the multi-load wheelbarrow that Daniel had created from salvaged parts and practical insight. "It's still my favorite of all the innovations we've developed," Elizabeth admitted, running her hand along the wheel with its repurposed tractor tire. "Not because it's the most sophisticated or highest impact, but because it represents the essence of what we've been trying to do, finding practical solutions to real problems by combining different perspectives." Daniel nodded in agreement. The wheelbarrow had been followed by hundreds of innovations over the years, many far more technically advanced and globally significant. Yet there was something special about this first collaboration, a tangible symbol of how necessity and opportunity had intersected on a hot summer day 20 years earlier. "I've been thinking about the next phase," Daniel said after a moment of reflection. "For both the center and myself." Elizabeth turned to him with interest. Though technically retired from daily operations, Daniel remained actively involved in the center's strategic direction. "What are you envisioning?" "A more focused role for me," he explained. "Less administration, more mentoring. Working directly with emerging farmer innovators, especially from regions where resource constraints drive the kind of practical creativity we're trying to nurture." It was a natural evolution for his role, leveraging his unique perspective and experience to guide the next generation of problem solvers while gradually stepping back from day-to-day management responsibilities. "James is ready to take on more leadership," Daniel continued. "He has the right balance of practical experience and formal education, and he understands the center's mission at a fundamental level." Elizabeth nodded her agreement. She had worked closely with James over the past decade and had observed his development into a capable leader who carried forward the Harper tradition of practical innovation while bringing his own perspectives to the role. "And beyond mentoring?" she inquired. "What do you see for your own path?" Daniel's expression softened as he looked out through the barn doors toward his fields, where crops grew in orderly rows, nourished by irrigation systems that had evolved through multiple generations of innovation since his desperate drought-time improvisations. "Farming," he said simply, returning to a more hands-on role with the land itself, testing new approaches in real conditions, remembering why we're doing all of this in the first place. Elizabeth smiled, recognizing in this desire the essence of what had made their collaboration successful from the beginning: Daniel's unbreakable connection to the practical realities of working the land. His refusal to become disconnected from the very challenges their innovations aimed to address. As they left the barn and walked toward the main complex, where a board meeting would soon begin, Elizabeth reflected on the journey they had taken together, from a chance encounter over a broken wheelbarrow to a global initiative that had transformed approaches to agricultural innovation worldwide. The Harper Center had become a model, studied and emulated by agricultural development organizations, universities, and corporations seeking to bridge the gap between technological possibility and practical implementation. Its farmer consultant network had expanded to include thousands of participants from diverse agricultural contexts, each contributing insights from their specific challenges and solutions. Yet at its heart, the center remained true to the philosophy that had emerged from that initial wheelbarrow repair, the recognition that valuable innovation often arose from necessity, from practical problem-solving under resource constraints, from the accumulated wisdom of those who worked the land day after day, season after season. 20 years, Elizabeth mused, as they approached the main building. From a broken wheelbarrow to a global network of practical innovators. Not bad for a struggling farmer and a disguised billionaire. Daniel's smile acknowledged the incredible journey they had shared. It worked because it was genuine from the beginning. You actually needed that wheelbarrow fixed, and I actually needed a new approach to save my farm. Everything that followed built on that authentic exchange. And as they entered the board meeting where the center's next 2 decades would be discussed and planned, Daniel carried with him the perspective that had guided his unlikely journey from the brink of foreclosure to international recognition, a deep respect for practical wisdom born of necessity, a belief in the power of Kanaf, collaborative innovation, and an unwavering commitment to solutions that serve the real needs of those working the land in all its diverse contexts. The struggling farmer who had fixed a flat wheelbarrow unaware that its owner was a billionaire farm advocate had found not just financial salvation, but purpose and impact beyond anything he could have imagined. And the billionaire who had recognized the value in that simple repair had discovered a model for innovation that connected corporate resources with practical wisdom in ways that benefited agricultural communities worldwide. Together, they had built something that honored the past while creating new possibilities for the future, a legacy of practical innovation that would continue to evolve long after both had stepped back from active leadership, touching fields and farmers far beyond the boundaries of Oak Ridge Valley, one thoughtful solution at a time. The board meeting that day focused on the center's vision for its 3rd decade, expanding its reach into regions facing the most severe agricultural challenges, developing new approaches to knowledge exchange among farmer innovators, and ensuring that technological advances remained grounded in practical applicability across diverse farming contexts. As Daniel listened to the presentations and contributed his insights, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction in what had been accomplished and optimism for what lay ahead. The Harper legacy had been not just preserved, but transformed from a family tradition of practical problem-solving on a single farm to a global approach to agricultural innovation that honored the wisdom of treat farmers everywhere. And it had all begun with a broken wheelbarrow, a resourceful repair, and the recognition that sometimes the most valuable innovations emerge from the most unexpected places, like the workshop of a struggling farmer fighting to preserve his family legacy, unaware that his practical solution would set in motion changes that would extend far beyond his fields to touch farms and farmers around the world. As the meeting concluded and board members dispersed to tour ongoing projects around the center, Daniel stepped outside for a moment alone. The sun was setting over his fields, casting long shadows across land that had been in his family for generations and would continue in Harper hands for generations to come. The crops growing in those fields were nourished by innovations that had emerged from his own necessity-driven creativity, now refined and improved through collaborative development with partners worldwide. In the distance, he could see James concluding the tour for the visiting delegates, his confident gestures and engaged expression reflecting his readiness to carry forward both the farming tradition and the innovation legacy that had become intertwined over the past 2 decades. Daniel took a deep breath of the evening air, rich with the scent of growing things and fertile soil. 20 years ago, he had been on the verge of losing everything his family had built over generations. Now, through an unlikely partnership that began with a simple wheelbarrow repair, he had not only preserved that legacy, but expanded it in ways his ancestors could never have imagined. From such small beginnings, significant changes had grown, a testament to what could emerge when necessity met opportunity, when practical wisdom combined with visionary support. When a struggling farmer and a billionaire farm advocate found common ground in a flat wheelbarrow and the practical solution that fixed it. As Daniel turned to rejoin the others inside, his gaze fell momentarily on the original barn where that fateful repair had taken place. In that simple act of helping a stranger, he had set in motion a journey that transformed not just his own circumstances, but approaches to agricultural innovation worldwide. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the most ordinary actions, and that the true value of innovation lies not in its complexity, but in its practical impact on the lives and work of those it serves. With that thought in mind, Daniel Harper, no longer struggling but forever a farmer at heart, walked back toward the center bearing his name, ready to help shape the next chapter in the ongoing story of practical agricultural innovation that had begun 20 years earlier with a broken wheelbarrow and the resourceful repair that fixed it. 30 years to the day after Daniel Harper had repaired Elizabeth Morgan Westfield's deliberately damaged wheelbarrow, a special gathering took place at the Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation. Representatives from farming communities across 6 continents joined with agricultural technology developers, policy experts, and educational leaders to celebrate 3 decades of collaborative innovation and to witness a significant transition in the center's leadership. The original farmhouse, now part of a complex that had grown organically around it while maintaining the working farm at its heart, hosted a display chronicling the evolution of the practical innovation approach. At the center of this historical exhibit stood the original multi-load wheelbarrow prototype, its repurposed tractor tire and reinforced axle now iconic symbols of the philosophy that had guided the initiative from its beginning, finding practical solutions to real problems by combining different perspectives and resources. Daniel Harper, now in his 70s, but still remarkably vigorous from a lifetime of physical work, balanced with intellectual engagement, moved through the gathering with quiet dignity. His silver hair and weathered face reflected decades of exposure to sun and wind, while his eyes retained the sharp observational quality that had identified innovative solutions where others saw only problems. Elizabeth Morgan Westfield, elegant in her 80s, used a cane but otherwise showed few concessions to age. Her mind remained as incisive as ever, her strategic vision still helping to guide the foundation that had grown from their initial collaboration, though both she and Daniel had stepped back from daily operations years earlier. The formal ceremony took place in the center's main hall, where James Harper, now in his 40s, and having directed the center's operations for the past decade, introduced the day's proceedings. 30 years ago, a chance encounter between a struggling farmer and a visionary advocate set in motion changes that would transform approaches to agricultural innovation worldwide. James began, his voice carrying the same practical authority as his uncle's, but with added polish from years of education and leadership experience. Today, we celebrate not just what has been accomplished, but the enduring philosophy that continues to guide our work, the belief that valuable innovation often emerges from necessity, from practical problem-solving under resource constraints, from the wisdom accumulated through direct engagement with the land." End quote. The ceremony included testimonials from farmers whose lives and operations had been transformed by innovations developed through the center's collaborative approach, presentations on the global impact of specific technologies that had emerged from the Farmer Consultant Network, and recognition of key contributors to the practical innovation movement that had spread far beyond the Harper Center to influence agricultural development worldwide. When Daniel rose to speak, the hall fell into respectful silence. Though he had gradually reduced his public role over the years, his perspective remained uniquely valuable, a living connection to the origins of an approach that had grown beyond what anyone could have anticipated 3 decades earlier. 30 years ago, I was trying to save my farm from foreclosure, he began, his voice still strong despite the years. I had no larger ambitions than preserving what my family had built over generations. When Elizabeth Morgan Westfield arrived with her broken wheelbarrow, I saw only a repair job, a chance to earn a little money doing what I'd always done, finding practical solutions with whatever materials were available. He glanced toward Elizabeth, seated in the front row, who smiled at the memory of their initial encounter. What neither of us fully recognized at the time was that we were establishing a model for collaboration that addressed a fundamental gap in agricultural innovation: the disconnect between technological possibility and practical implementation in real farming conditions. By bringing together corporate resources and practical farming wisdom, we created something that honored both perspectives while producing solutions more effective than either could have developed alone. End quote. Daniel went on to outline how this collaborative approach had evolved over 3 decades from his individual consulting relationship with AgriNovat to the global network of farmer innovators that now connected practical insights from diverse agricultural contexts with the resources to develop and disseminate effective solutions. The greatest validation of this approach, he concluded, is not in the awards or recognition the center has received, but in the practical impact on farms and farming communities worldwide, in the technologies that have been adapted to serve diverse needs, in the knowledge exchange that has empowered farmers to develop their own solutions, and in the bridges built between corporate, academic, and practical farming worlds that once operated in isolation. As Daniel returned to his seat amid heartfelt applause, James took the podium again to announce the day's most significant development, the formal transition of the Harper Center into a fully independent foundation. With expanded partnerships across the agricultural sector and a renewed commitment to its founding philosophy of practical innovation, developed through genuine collaboration between diverse perspectives. As we move into our 4th decade, James explained, we honor our origins by recommitting to the principles that have guided us from the beginning that the most valuable innovations often emerge from unexpected places, that practical wisdom born of necessity deserves recognition and amplification, and that true collaboration requires mutual respect for different forms of knowledge and experience." End quote. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new display in the center's main hall, a life-sized bronze sculpture depicting Daniel Harper repairing the wheelbarrow, with Elizabeth Morgan Westfield observing attentively. The plaque beneath it bore a simple inscription, "From small beginnings, the repair that launched a movement." As the formal proceedings transitioned to a more relaxed celebration, Daniel and Elizabeth found a quiet moment together near the original barn, where their unlikely partnership had begun 3 decades earlier. "Did you ever imagine it would grow into all this?" Elizabeth asked, echoing a question she had posed at various milestones throughout their collaboration. Daniel shook his head, a familiar gesture that acknowledged both the unpredictability and the satisfaction of the journey they had shared. "When you arrived with that wheelbarrow, I was just trying to keep my head above water for one more season. The idea that fixing it would lead to a global movement in agricultural innovation, that wasn't even conceivable." Elizabeth nodded, her expression reflective. "The best journeys often begin without a clear destination. We recognized a mutual need and a complementary perspective, and everything else grew from that authentic beginning." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as visitors moved between demonstration areas where the latest Harper Center innovations were being showcased, alongside the practical farming operations that remained the foundation of the center's approach. "James has done remarkably well," Elizabeth observed. "He's maintained the essential balance between practical application and broader impact." "He understands what makes this work," Daniel agreed. "The moment we become disconnected from the daily realities of farming, from the practical challenges that drive innovation in the field, we lose what makes our approach valuable." As they walked slowly back toward the main celebration, Elizabeth reflected on the evolution of their partnership, from a chance encounter over a broken wheelbarrow to a global initiative that had transformed approaches to agricultural innovation worldwide. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "in business school they teach case studies about disruption and innovation, usually focusing on dramatic technological breakthroughs or radical new business models. But what we built together came from something much more fundamental, recognizing the value and practical wisdom that was already there, just waiting to be amplified and connected with the resources to make a broader impact." End quote. Daniel nodded. "The most valuable innovations often aren't about inventing something completely new. They're about seeing the potential in what already exists, what's been developed through necessity and experience, and finding ways to refine and share those solutions." End quote. They rejoined the celebration, where farmers from diverse regions were engaged in animated discussions with technology developers, policy experts, and the next generation of agricultural innovators being mentored through the center's educational programs. The atmosphere hummed with the energy of genuine collaboration, people with different perspectives, united by a shared commitment to practical solutions for real agricultural challenges. As the day drew to a close, a young farmer from a developing region approached Daniel with evident respect. "Mr. Harper," she said, "your story has inspired many of us who struggle with limited resources. Do you have any advice for farmers facing similar challenges to what you experienced 30 years ago?" Daniel considered the question carefully, aware that his response would carry weight with this young innovator and perhaps many others. "Trust your practical knowledge," he said finally. "The solutions you develop out of necessity, the adaptations you make to keep going with limited resources, these aren't just stopgap measures. They're valuable innovations that deserve recognition and refinement. And don't be afraid to partner with those who have complementary resources and perspectives, as long as that partnership is built on mutual respect and genuine collaboration." End quote. The young farmer nodded gratefully, clearly finding affirmation for her own innovative approaches developed under resource constraints. As she moved away, Elizabeth gave Daniel an appreciative glance. "Still mentoring, I see." "Always," he replied with a slight smile. "It's the most important legacy we can leave, not just the specific innovations we've developed, but the philosophy behind them. The recognition that valuable solutions can emerge from unexpected places, developed by people whose practical wisdom might otherwise go unrecognized." They made their way to the center's main entrance, where James was bidding farewell to the day's visitors. Beyond him, the Harper farm stretched toward the horizon, its fields glowing golden in the late afternoon sun, a living testament to a family legacy that had not merely been preserved, but transformed and expanded through an unlikely partnership that began with a simple wheelbarrow repair. 30 years had passed since Daniel Harper, a struggling farmer on the verge of losing everything, had fixed a flat wheelbarrow for Elizabeth Morgan Westfield, unaware that she was a billionaire farm advocate conducting a deliberate test of his innovative capabilities. From that small beginning, significant changes had grown, changes that touched not just the Harper farm, but agricultural communities worldwide, creating a model for collaborative innovation that bridged the gap between corporate resources and practical farming wisdom. As they stood together, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid hues above the land that had witnessed their unlikely partnership's beginning, Daniel and Elizabeth shared a moment of quiet appreciation for the journey they had taken together and for the legacy that would continue to unfold long after both had passed from the scene. "To practical solutions," Elizabeth said softly, echoing the toast they had shared at many milestones throughout their collaboration. "And to unexpected beginnings," Daniel added, his gaze taking in the farm, the innovation center, and the diverse community of problem solvers their partnership had brought together, all emerging from a flat wheelbarrow and the resourceful repair that had fixed it, connecting a struggling farmer and a billionaire advocate in a collaboration that had grown beyond what either could have imagined 3 decades before. As twilight deepened over the Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation, the day's celebration gradually concluded. Visitors departed, staff members completed their closing tasks, and the facility settled into the quiet rhythm that descended after busy events. Only a few lights remained illuminated in the main complex, while the farmhouse, still Daniel's primary residence, despite the changes that had transformed the property around it, glowed with warm welcome in the press. Gathering darkness. In the peaceful evening hours, Daniel sat on the same porch where he had once contemplated the seemingly insurmountable challenges facing his struggling farm. Now, at 75, he viewed a vastly different landscape, not just the physical evolution of the Harper property, with its integration of traditional farming operations and innovative development facilities, but the broader panorama of accomplishment and impact that had emerged from that fateful encounter 30 years earlier. The financial stability that had once seemed an impossible dream was now a long-established reality. The Harper farm had not merely survived but thrived, becoming both a productive agricultural operation and a living laboratory for practical innovation. The legacy that Daniel had fought so desperately to preserve had been not just maintained, but expanded in ways his ancestors could never have envisioned. Yet as he reflected on the 3 decades since Elizabeth Morgan Westfield had arrived with her deliberately damaged wheelbarrow, Daniel recognized that the most significant outcomes had little to do with his personal financial salvation or even the continuation of the Harper farming tradition. What mattered most was the ripple effect. How a simple repair based on practical necessity had evolved into a model for collaborative innovation that connected diverse perspectives and resources, addressing real agricultural challenges worldwide. The multi-load wheelbarrow, now in its 7th generation of refinement, remained a best-selling product in agricultural markets across 6 continents. But it was only one of hundreds of innovations that had emerged from the practical innovation approach pioneered through their partnership irrigation systems that conserved water while improving crop yields, equipment modifications that reduced physical strain and increased efficiency, soil management techniques that enhanced fertility while promoting environmental sustainability. More important than any specific technology, however, was the transformation in approach, the recognition that valuable agricultural innovation often emerged not from isolated corporate laboratories or academic research institutions, but from the practical problem-solving of working farmers facing real challenges with limited resources. By creating mechanisms to identify, refine, and amplify these grassroots innovations, the Harper Center had helped bridge the gap between technological possibility and practical implementation, between SCA, corporate resources, and agricultural realities. As darkness settled completely over the farm, Daniel's thoughts turned to the future. The formal leadership transition announced at the day's ceremony marked another evolution in the center's development, a step toward ensuring that the practical innovation approach would continue to flourish long after its original architects had departed the scene. James had proven himself a capable steward of both the Harper farming tradition and the innovation legacy, maintaining the essential balance between practical application and broader impact. The expanded partnerships and independent foundation status would provide additional resources and reach, enabling the center to address emerging agricultural challenges in regions facing the most severe resource constraints. The educational programs would continue to nurture the next generation of practical innovators, ensuring a pipeline of problem solvers grounded in both traditional farming wisdom and contemporary technological possibilities. Daniel's role would continue to evolve as well, focusing increasingly on mentorship rather than administration, on sharing the philosophy behind the practical innovation approach rather than managing its daily operations. This gradual transition felt entirely appropriate, a natural progression that honored the past while creating space for new perspectives and fresh approaches. As he prepared to retire for the night, Daniel caught sight of the framed photograph that had occupied a place of honor in his home for decades, a simple image of the original wheelbarrow prototype he had created from salvaged parts and practical insight. It stood as a tangible reminder of how significant change could emerge from humble beginnings, how a desperate repair undertaken to earn a modest fee had set in motion transformations that extended far beyond one farmer's struggle to save his family legacy. The memory of that hot summer day 30 years earlier remained vivid, the unexpected arrival of a woman in overalls with a broken wheelbarrow. The simple satisfaction of finding a practical solution with available materials. The surprise of discovering her true identity and the opportunity she represented. Neither Daniel nor Elizabeth could have foreseen the far-reaching consequences of that initial encounter, the global movement in practical agricultural innovation that would grow from their unlikely partnership. As he drifted toward sleep, Daniel Harper, no longer struggling but forever a farmer at heart, carried with him a profound sense of gratitude for the journey he had shared with Elizabeth Morgan Westfield. From such different worlds they had come, with such different resources and perspectives, yet they had found common ground in a shared commitment to practical solutions for real agricultural challenges. The struggling farmer who had fixed a flat wheelbarrow, unaware that its owner was a billionaire farm advocate, had found not just financial salvation, but purpose and impact beyond anything he could have imagined. And the billionaire who had recognized the value in that simple repair had discovered a model for innovation that connected corporate resources with practical wisdom in ways that benefited agricultural communities worldwide. Together, they had built something that honored the past while creating new possibilities for the future. A legacy of practical innovation that would continue to evolve long after both had passed from the scene, touching fields and farmers far beyond the boundaries of Oak Ridge Valley, one thoughtful solution at a time. And it had all begun with a broken wheelbarrow, a resourceful repair, and the recognition that sometimes the most valuable innovations emerge from the most unexpected places, like the workshop of a struggling farmer fighting to preserve his family legacy. Unaware that his practical solution would set in motion changes that would extend far beyond his fields to touch farms and farmers around the world. As dawn broke over the Harper farm the following morning, Daniel rose as he had for decades with the first light, ready to engage with the day's work and challenges. Age had slowed his movements somewhat, but had done nothing to diminish his commitment to the land and the innovative approaches that had emerged from his lifetime of practical problem-solving. After a simple breakfast, he walked his fields as he always did, observing crop conditions, checking irrigation systems, noting potential issues that might require attention. The practice connected him to generations of Harpers who had walked these same paths, though the technologies and techniques had evolved dramatically over the decades. Near the eastern boundary, he encountered a small group of international visitors, participants in the center's farmer exchange program, who had remained after the previous day's celebration to observe the working farm operations that remained the foundation of the Harper approach to innovation. Daniel joined them for a portion of their tour, listening more than speaking, as James explained the integrated systems that maintained productivity while serving as testing grounds for new approaches. When questions arose about the historical development of specific innovations, James deferred to his uncle, acknowledging the depth of experience and insight that remained unique to the farmer who had launched this entire movement with a simple wheelbarrow repair. As the morning progressed, Daniel made his way to the small workshop he maintained, separate from the center's more elaborate development facilities. Here, surrounded by tools and materials reminiscent of those he had used throughout his farming career, he continued to explore practical solutions to agricultural challenges, sometimes refining existing technologies, sometimes developing entirely new approaches based on observations from the field. Currently, he was working on modifications to hand tools for small-scale farming operations in regions with limited mechanization, simple adjustments to traditional implements that reduced physical strain while increasing efficiency. The project connected him to his earliest innovations, which had similarly emerged from practical necessity and direct experience rather than theoretical design processes. Elizabeth arrived mid-morning, having stayed overnight in the guest accommodations maintained for visitors to the center. Though they had both gradually reduced their formal roles in the organization's operations, their collaboration continued through strategic guidance, mentorship of emerging innovators, and occasional direct involvement in projects that particularly engaged their interest or expertise. "How does it feel the morning after?" she asked, as she joined him in the workshop, referring to the previous day's celebration and leadership transition announcement. Daniel considered the question as he adjusted a component on the prototype tool. "Like watching a child grow up," he said finally. "Pride in what's been accomplished, confidence in the future direction, and a certain peace in knowing the essential work will continue regardless of our individual roles." Elizabeth nodded in understanding. Their partnership had evolved through many phases over the 3 decades since their initial encounter, from the direct collaboration of the early years to the more strategic oversight of the center's expansion period to their current roles as elder statesmen of the practical innovation movement. Throughout these transitions, they had maintained the mutual respect and complementary perspectives that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "The foundation structure is formally in place now," she noted. "That should ensure the continuity of the approach regardless of changes in corporate leadership or market pressures." This had been a priority for both of them in recent years, establishing institutional frameworks that would preserve the essential philosophy of the Harper Center beyond their personal involvement. The independent foundation status announced at the previous day's ceremony represented the culmination of these efforts, providing both financial stability and operational autonomy for the practical innovation initiative they had launched. "James has a good team around him," Daniel observed. "People who understand both the agricultural realities and the broader mission. That's as important as the formal structures." They spent the remainder of the morning reviewing ongoing projects and discussing potential expansions of the center's farmer exchange program, particularly in regions facing severe resource constraints, where practical innovation born of necessity might offer valuable insights for agricultural challenges worldwide. As they shared a simple lunch in the farmhouse kitchen, maintaining the tradition of midday meals that had sustained generations of Harper farmers during busy days, their conversation shifted to more personal reflections on the journey they had shared. 30 years, Elizabeth mused. From a broken wheelbarrow to a global movement in practical innovation, it's been quite a ride, hasn't it? Daniel smiled, acknowledging the extraordinary transformations that had emerged from their unlikely partnership. Not the path either of us would have predicted, he agreed. But looking back, there's a certain logic to how it unfolded, each step building on what came before, each challenge leading to new insights and opportunities. What stands out most for you? For you, Elizabeth asked. After all these years and all we've accomplished together? Daniel considered the question carefully, his gaze drifting toward the window that framed a view of his fields. The land that had been in his family for generations and had provided both the foundation and the testing ground for the practical innovation approach. They had developed the connections, he said finally. Not just between us and our different worlds, but between all the people who've become part of this movement, farmers sharing their practical wisdom, engineers adapting their technical knowledge, educators transmitting these approaches to new generations, creating bridges between perspectives and resources that might otherwise have remained isolated from each other. End quote. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. That's been the real innovation, hasn't it? Not any specific technology or product, but the collaborative approach itself, recognizing the value in practical wisdom born of necessity and creating mechanisms to amplify and share it. As afternoon approached, they walked together toward the main complex of the Harper Center, where the day's regular activities had resumed following the previous day's celebration. Farmers and engineers collaborated in development laboratories. Educational programs engaged students from diverse backgrounds in practical problem-solving challenges. And administrative staff coordinated the global network of partnerships that extended the center's approach across agricultural contexts worldwide. It's in good hands, Elizabeth observed, as they watched these operations unfold. The philosophy has taken root beyond any individual leadership or specific initiative. Daniel nodded in agreement. The practical innovation approach they had pioneered had indeed transcended its origins, becoming a movement that influenced agricultural development practices globally. From a desperate attempt to save one family farm had emerged methodologies now taught in agricultural universities, implemented by development organizations, and adopted by corporations seeking more effective approaches to technological innovation. As they completed their tour of the day's activities, they found themselves once again near the original barn, where their unlikely partnership had begun 3 decades earlier. The structure, carefully preserved amid the evolution of the surrounding property, stood as a tangible reminder of the humble beginnings from which significant change had grown. "I should be heading back," Elizabeth said, as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. "Board meetings in Chicago tomorrow." Daniel nodded, familiar with the rhythms of her continued involvement in corporate governance, despite her formal retirement from executive leadership. "Until next time, then." They shook hands, the gesture containing the warmth of 30 years' collaboration and mutual respect. No elaborate farewells were necessary between partners whose journey had encompassed so many meetings and partings, each contributing to the evolution of the shared vision they had built together. As Elizabeth's car disappeared down the driveway, Daniel remained near the barn, reflecting on the day's activities and the previous evening's celebrations. The transition they had formally announced represented another step in the natural evolution of their initiative, creating space for new leadership and fresh approaches while preserving the essential philosophy that had guided them from the beginning. The sun was setting over his fields, casting long shadows across land that had been in his family for generations and would continue under Harper's stewardship for generations to come. The crops growing in those fields were nourished by innovations that had emerged from his own necessity-driven creativity, now refined and improved through collaborative development with partners worldwide. From such small beginnings, significant changes had grown a testament to what could emerge when necessity met opportunity, when practical wisdom combined with visionary support, when a struggling farmer and a billionaire farm advocate found common ground in a flat wheelbarrow and the practical solution that fixed it. As darkness settled over the Harper Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation, Daniel Harper, no longer struggling but forever a farmer, at heart turned toward home, carrying with him the satisfaction of a journey well-traveled and a legacy secured not just for his own family, but for farming communities around the world. The path that had begun 30 years earlier with a simple wheelbarrow repair had led to destinations neither he nor Elizabeth could have imagined at the outset. Yet through all the unexpected turns and developments, they had maintained the essential principles that had guided them from the beginning: a deep respect for practical wisdom born of necessity, a belief in the power of collaborative innovation, and an unwavering commitment to solutions that serve the real needs of those working the land in all its diverse contexts. The struggling farmer who had fixed a flat wheelbarrow unaware that its owner was a billionaire farm advocate had found not just financial salvation, but purpose and impact beyond anything he could have imagined. And the billionaire who had recognized the value in that simple repair had discovered a model for innovation that connected corporate resources with practical wisdom in ways that benefited agricultural communities worldwide. Together, they had built something that honored the past while creating new possibilities for the future, a legacy of practical innovation that would continue to evolve long after both had passed from the scene, touching fields and farmers far beyond the boundaries of Oak Ridge Valley, one thoughtful solution at a time. And it had all begun with a broken wheelbarrow, a resourceful repair, and the recognition that sometimes the most valuable innovations emerge from the most unexpected places, like the workshop of a struggling farmer fighting to preserve his family legacy, unaware that his practical solution would set in motion changes that would extend far beyond his fields to touch farms and farmers around the world. Under the starlit sky, the Harper farm settled into the peace of evening, a working agricultural operation that had become the heart of a global movement in practical innovation. A family legacy that had been not just preserved but transformed through an unlikely partnership that began with a simple act of helping a stranger with a broken wheelbarrow on a hot summer day 30 years before. The journey from that small beginning to the thriving Center for Practical Agricultural Innovation had been as unpredictable as farming itself, with its constant interplay of challenge and response, problem and solution. Yet through all the unexpected developments and evolutions, the fundamental philosophy had remained constant: a deep appreciation for practical wisdom born of necessity, a commitment to collaborative approaches that bridged diverse perspectives and resources, and an unwavering focus on solutions that addressed real needs in real farming conditions. As Daniel Harper closed the door of the farmhouse that had sheltered generations of his family, he carried with him not just the satisfaction of having preserved his personal legacy, but the deeper fulfillment of having contributed to a bold movement that might help countless other farmers preserve theirs, all emerging from a flat wheelbarrow and the practical solution that fixed it, connecting a struggling farmer and a billionaire advocate in a collaboration that had grown beyond what either could have imagined 3 decades before.